He had exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds before the gunman's finger tightened. 3 seconds before a woman died in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning while everyone else dove under tables and screamed. 3 seconds while Ethan Walker, a 32-year-old construction worker with paint-stained jeans, a cold cup of coffee, and $47 in his checking account, sat perfectly still and did the math that only men trained to kill already know how to do. He didn't want to do this. He'd promised himself he was done. He stood up anyway. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let me know how far this thing has traveled. Now stay with me. Every word of what happens next matters. The rain came down hard that morning. Not the soft, cinematic kind of rain that makes cities look like oil paintings. The ugly kind. Horizontal sheets of gray water that soaked through jackets in 30 seconds flat and turned every sidewalk into a shallow river. Seattle in November had a way of making everything feel slightly hopeless, and Ethan Walker had learned a long time ago to stop fighting the weather and just walk through it. He pushed open the door of Lena's Cup, a narrow, warmly lit cafe wedged between a dry cleaner and a bail bondsman on 4th Avenue, and stood in the doorway for a moment, dripping. The place smelled like burned espresso and cinnamon rolls and something that almost resembled comfort. He shook the water off his jacket, ignored the look the barista gave him, and found the last open table near the window. The laptop he pulled from his bag was old enough to have a cracked hinge held together with electrical tape. He opened it carefully, the way you handle something you can't afford to replace, and pulled up his bank's website. The number on the screen didn't change no matter how many times he looked at it, $47.12. He stared at it for a moment. Then he pulled a folded envelope from his chest pocket, the kind that had final notice printed in red across the top, and smoothed it out on the table next to his coffee. $1,200. That's what they wanted. Rent, $1,200, due in 9 days. He had 47. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose and started doing arithmetic on a paper napkin, the way his father used to do at the kitchen table when things got tight. He wrote down every number he could think of. The check from the Harmon Street job, maybe $400 if the contractor paid on time, which he never did. The cash he'd set aside in the coffee can on the refrigerator, $63 and some change. He could pick up a weekend shift at the warehouse on Airport Way, maybe pull another $250. He was $60 short no matter how he arranged the numbers. He tried 3 different arrangements anyway. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. "Daddy, are you coming home early today?" Sophie, 9 years old, currently sitting in Mrs. Harrington's 3rd grade classroom 4 miles away, apparently using her reading period to text her father. He smiled despite himself, a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but was genuine. "Pay attention in class," he typed back. "I'll be home by 5. 3 dots appeared. "Can we have grilled cheese tonight?" "Sure, Bug. With the tomatoes on the side, not inside, I know. Promise?" He stared at that last word for a second longer than he needed to. Promise. Sophie used that word the way other kids used please, like it was the final seal on something important, a contract she expected to be honored. She'd started doing it after her mother died 2 years ago. Ethan had noticed, but he'd never said anything about it. Some things you just carry. "Promise," he typed. Then he put the phone face down on the table and looked back at the napkin full of numbers. He didn't notice the black Escalade that pulled up outside. He noticed the second one, though, because it double-parked directly in front of the cafe's window, engine running, and 2 men in identical gray suits stepped out of it. Not police suits, not business suits. The kind of suits that were expensive enough to look casual, but cut in a way that left room for things underneath the jacket. Ethan had spent enough time around men like that to know exactly what things underneath the jacket meant. He watched them from behind his coffee cup. They weren't looking at each other, they were scanning. One of them had his right hand resting at his hip in a way that looked relaxed but wasn't. They weren't there for coffee. Ethan set his cup down. The cafe door opened and a woman walked in, and the entire room subtly shifted the way rooms do when someone with gravity enters. She wasn't performing anything. She wasn't dressed to impress, wasn't surrounded by an entourage, wasn't making noise. She wore a black wool coat, dark jeans, and low-heeled boots, and her dark hair was pulled back simply. She was talking on her phone in a low, controlled voice, And she moved to the counter with the easy confidence of someone who has learned that the fastest way through any room is to act like you already own it. She ordered without looking at the menu. Black coffee, no sugar. Ethan's eyes moved back to the window. A third car, a white panel van, no markings, had stopped at the corner half a block down. He couldn't see into it. It hadn't moved in 90 seconds. His jaw tightened. He wasn't doing this. He wasn't in that life anymore. He was a construction worker with $47 and a daughter who wanted grilled cheese with the tomatoes on the side, and whatever was about to happen in this coffee shop was not his problem. He looked back at the napkin. The van's side door opened. The man who stepped out was wearing a light jacket with the collar turned up, and his right hand was already in his jacket pocket in the specific, unmistakable way that means a person is holding something they intend to use. He wasn't one of the gray-suited men. He was something else entirely, moving with the controlled, deliberate pace of someone who has done this before and isn't scared, which is always more dangerous than someone who is. He came straight for the cafe door. Ethan stood up before he'd consciously decided to. His body made the decision and informed his brain a half-second later, the way it used to on operations when thinking too much was how people got killed. The man pushed through the door. He pulled the gun before the bell above the door had finished ringing. A compact semi-automatic, suppressor already threaded, arm coming up with practiced smoothness toward the woman at the counter. Everything happened very fast and very quietly, which is how the worst things usually happen. Ethan crossed the 8 feet between his table and the gunman in less time than it takes to describe it. He got inside the man's arm before the gun was fully raised, his left hand seizing the wrist and twisting in a specific direction that the human elbow is not designed to accommodate. There was a sound. The gun hit the floor. Ethan's right elbow connected with the man's jaw. Short, economic, no wasted motion. And the man's legs folded. Ethan caught him on the way down, guided him to the floor without drama, and had the man's hands secured behind his back with his own belt before anyone in the cafe had finished processing what they were seeing. The whole thing took roughly 4 seconds. The cafe was completely silent. Ethan straightened up. He was breathing normally. His hands were steady. He looked around the room. The frozen barista, the customers with their hands over their mouths, the woman at the counter who had spun around at the first sound of movement and was now staring at him with dark, very focused eyes. "Someone call 911, Ethan said. His voice came out flat and even. "Tell them one down, armed. Check the van on the corner. There may be others." Then he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, tucked his laptop under his arm, and walked toward the door. "Wait," the woman said. He stopped. "You can't just—" She paused, visibly recalibrating. "You just disarmed a professional in 4 seconds." "He wasn't that professional," Ethan said. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a moment. She was watching him with an expression he recognized. Not fear, not gratitude exactly, but the sharp, assessing look of someone filing away every detail. Smart eyes, the kind that didn't miss things. "Nobody," he said. "I'm nobody." He pushed through the door and walked back out into the rain. His name was Ethan Walker, and he had, in a previous life, been something considerably more than nobody. He'd grown up in Tacoma, the kind of neighborhood where ambition was treated with suspicion, and the boys who went somewhere usually went somewhere in a direction nobody was proud of. Ethan had gone in the other direction mostly by accident. A recruiter had come to his high school during the spring of his junior year, and something about the man's straight back and quiet certainty had spoken to something in Ethan that he couldn't articulate at 17 and still couldn't fully articulate now. He'd enlisted at 18, made it to Bud/S at 20. The dropout rate was somewhere around 80%, and his Bud's class had been no exception to that arithmetic. Ethan had made it through on pure stubbornness and a specific kind of cold weather tolerance that his teammates from warmer climates found genuinely inhuman. He'd served 8 years as a Navy SEAL, 4 deployments, missions he had never spoken about and was legally bound not to speak about, in places that officially he had never been. He'd been good at it, very good at it. The kind of good that gets you noticed for the wrong reasons, pulled into operations that exist in the gaps between official records where plausible deniability lives. He'd gotten out when Sophie was 2 years old, which was 6 months before Claire died. Claire. He didn't think her name in full very often anymore. It felt like pressing on a bruise. Not sharp exactly, just there. She'd been a pediatric nurse, funny in a dry, understated way that took people a while to catch on to. And she'd loved Sophie with a ferocity that made Ethan sometimes feel like he was watching something almost too private to witness. She'd been driving home from a night shift on a wet highway when a semi ran a red light at 4:17 in the morning. Sophie had been 3 years and 2 months old. Ethan didn't have a precise word for what the next 2 years had been. He'd gotten up every day because Sophie needed him to get up. He'd fed her and read to her and attended school plays and learned to braid hair and filled out third-grade enrollment forms and figured out how to cook the 8 or 9 things Sophie would actually eat. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, he had apparently also held himself together, though he sometimes looked in the mirror at night and wasn't sure. He did construction work because it was physical and uncomplicated, and nobody asked questions about your background. You showed up. You built things. At the end of the day, something existed that hadn't existed before. There was a straightforwardness to it that he found. Not comforting exactly, but honest. He was doing fine. That was the word he used. Fine. He picked Sophie up from school at 4:30, and she ran across the parking lot at him with the specific all-in velocity of a 9-year-old who has been sitting still for 6 hours and is operating at maximum pressure. "Dad," she said, grabbing his hand. "Mackenzie said that dolphins are smarter than people, and I said that's impossible. And then Mrs. Harrington said, actually, dolphins have very complex cognitive, chum," he said. That word, yes. And so now I don't know if Mackenzie was right or wrong, and it's really bothering me. Mackenzie was mostly right, Ethan said. Dolphins are very smart. Not smarter than people, but smart in different ways. Sophie considered this for 3 steps. What ways? They can echolocate. Humans can't do that. What's echo? It means they make sounds and use the bounce back to see things, like sonar on a submarine. So they have sonar built in? Basically, yeah. That's actually cooler than being smart, Sophie decided. I wish I had sonar. You kind of do, Ethan said. You always know when I'm lying. She looked up at him with a small, skeptical expression that was so much like Claire it stopped him cold for half a second. That's not sonar, Dad. That's just because you're bad at lying. Also true, he admitted. She held his hand all the way to the bus stop, which she was at an age where she sometimes found embarrassing, but today apparently didn't, and Ethan was privately, quietly grateful for that. The phone call came the next morning. Ethan was making coffee in the kitchen, the cheap stuff, the kind that came in the red plastic container, when his cell rang with a number he didn't recognize. Seattle area code. He almost didn't answer it. Mr. Walker, a woman's voice, controlled and precise. This is Aurora Kensington. He put the coffee down. I got your number through the police report, she continued. You left before they could get your statement, which I understand was intentional. I'd like to speak with you. About what? I think you know about what. He leaned against the counter. Through the doorway, he could see Sophie at the kitchen table eating cereal and reading a library book, her feet swinging above the floor. Ms. Kensington, I appreciate you calling, but there's nothing to talk about. I saw a situation and I handled it. I'm not interested in... I'm not calling to thank you, she said. Though I do, genuinely. I'm calling because I need to offer you a job. I have a job. Construction work. Yes. $47 in your checking account as of yesterday morning. He went very still. I'm not surveilling you, she said quickly. I saw your laptop screen when I walked past your table. I wasn't trying to, it was just... I noticed things. It's a problem. A brief pause. I'm sorry, that was an intrusive thing to say. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, that she'd noticed or that she'd apologized for it. What kind of job? He said. Security director. Personal and corporate. I have 2 people currently in those roles, and I'd describe both of them as dangerously underqualified, which yesterday's events made abundantly clear. She paused. I'll pay you 4 times whatever you're currently making, benefits, including full health coverage, and I'd need you to relocate, but to a position that allows a stable schedule. Your daughter wouldn't have her life disrupted. You know about Sophie. Police report listed her as your dependent. I wasn't digging. Another pause. Mr. Walker, I know you don't want to talk about your service record. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to come have a cup of coffee with me and hear what I have to say. If you're not interested after that, I'll leave you alone. Ethan looked at the coffee can on the refrigerator, the one with $63 in it. Where? He said. Aurora Kensington's office was on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower downtown, and the view from her window was the kind of thing people put in screensavers. She was standing at the window when Ethan was shown in, and she turned when she heard him, and for a moment they just looked at each other in the way that people do when they've already seen each other at their worst and are now trying to establish whether they can be civil. She was younger than he'd expected, though he wasn't sure why he'd expected older. 30, maybe. Clear dark eyes, good at staying level. She'd dressed down for the meeting. No power suit, just a simple navy sweater and slacks, which he suspected was intentional. Mr. Walker, she said. Ethan, he said. Mr. Walker sounds like someone's principal. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. Ethan, coffee? Sure. She poured it herself, which he noted. The kind of detail that tells you something. You're wondering why I'm handling my own coffee when I presumably have assistants, she said, handing him the cup. Something like that. Because they're busy doing things I'm paying them to do, and I'm capable of making coffee. She sat down across from him. I'm also wondering what you're going to say when I ask about your military background, because your reaction yesterday was not the reaction of someone who went through basic training and deployed to Germany. My background is classified. I know. I'm not asking for specifics. She leaned forward slightly. I'm asking if you understand what kind of situation you'd be walking into. Well, what kind of situation is that? She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment he saw something shift in her expression. A dropping of some professional veil, something more real underneath. Someone has been trying to destroy my company for 8 months, she said. Sabotage initially. Contracts going missing, bids being undercut with information that could only have come from inside. Then a whistleblower I was working with died in what the police called an accidental overdose. He didn't use drugs. She said this flatly, without drama. And then yesterday. You think it's connected? I know it's connected, I just can't prove it yet. Ethan turned the coffee cup in his hands. What does your company do? Defense technology, secure communication systems primarily. Signal encryption for military and government contracts. We've been growing fast, maybe too fast, in ways that made certain people uncomfortable. She paused. I built this company from a prototype I developed in my grad school apartment. I have 412 employees. Most of them have families. She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to go to war for me. I'm asking you to help me figure out what's coming and stop it before anyone else gets hurt. Ethan sat with that for a moment. I have a 9-year-old daughter, he said. I know. She's my first priority, always. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't ask you to negotiate it. If I take this, my hours need to be predictable enough that I'm home when she needs me. Agreed. And if anything about this job puts her at risk, I'm out. No discussion. Aurora nodded. Of course. He looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching, without looking away, without doing any of the performative things people do when they're trying to convince you of something they don't fully believe. She was scared. He could see it underneath the control, the way you can see the outline of something through a frosted window. But she wasn't letting the fear make her sloppy or dishonest. He respected that. Okay, he said. Geez. He didn't tell Sophie much at first. I got a new job, he said over grilled cheese that evening. Tomatoes on the side. He'd remembered. What kind of job? Sophie asked, peeling the crust off her sandwich with surgical precision. Security for a company downtown. Like a security guard? Sort of. More like making sure things are safe, figuring out if there are problems before they become problems. Sophie considered this. Like a detective? A little bit like that, yeah. She chewed thoughtfully. Does it pay more than the construction thing? He looked at her. 9 years old, already doing the family math. Yeah, Bug. It pays more. Good, she said simply and went back to peeling her crust. He watched her for a moment. This small, serious, complicated person who carried his face and her mother's eyes and something entirely her own running right through the center of her, and felt the familiar weight of it. The thing about loving someone that much is that it makes you careful about everything. He was going to be careful. His first week at Kensington Defense Technologies was spent mostly reading. Aurora gave him access to everything, every security report, every incident log, every contract document from the past 18 months. He read them the way he used to read mission briefs, methodically, looking for patterns rather than individual data points. He set up in the small conference room she'd allocated to him, covered the whiteboard in what looked to the other staff like incomprehensible notation, and didn't say much to anyone. He also watched. He watched who came and went, watched who had coffee with whom, watched which assistants checked their phones when certain topics came up in meetings, watched the security feeds from the lobby and the parking garage, running them at double speed late at night after the building emptied out. He found the first problem on day 4. "You're head of internal IT," he said to Aurora, appearing in her office doorway at 7 in the evening when the floor was mostly cleared. She looked up from her desk. Her reading glasses made her look, he noticed, approximately 4 years younger and about 40% less intimidating. "Marcus Trent? He's been accessing files outside his clearance level, consistently, for about 6 months. He's smart about it. Never the same files twice, never for very long. But the pattern's there." Aurora sat back. "Marcus has been with me since the beginning." "I know. He was the 3rd person I hired." "I know." He waited. She took her glasses off, rubbed her eyes. "You're sure? The logs don't lie. He might have an explanation. Sometimes people do. But you need to ask him." She was quiet for a moment. This was the part that was hard, he knew. The math on a whiteboard is easy. The human part is never easy. "Can you be in the room when I talk to him?" she said. "Yes." She nodded once, decisively, the way she nodded when she'd made a decision and wasn't going back from it. "Tomorrow morning." No, Marcus Trent did not have a good explanation. He came into Aurora's office at 9 o'clock with a coffee and a slightly guarded expression. The expression of a man who has been called into his boss's office and isn't entirely sure why, but has a feeling it's not good. He was mid-40s, compact, with the kind of face that held its cards well under normal circumstances. These weren't normal circumstances. Ethan sat in the corner of the room without speaking. He wasn't trying to be threatening. He'd positioned himself there specifically because the corner was neither confrontational nor invisible, just present. A reminder. Aurora laid it out without preamble. The files, the dates, the pattern. Marcus went very still. A particular kind of stillness, not the stillness of innocence trying to understand, but the stillness of someone deciding how much to admit. "I can explain," he started. "Please," Aurora said. Her voice was entirely controlled. What came out over the next 40 minutes was complicated and sad in the specific way that betrayals from people you trusted always are. Marcus hadn't been working directly against Aurora. He was clear about that, and Ethan believed him, though not entirely. He'd been approached 8 months ago by a man he described as a consultant, someone connected to a competitor who'd offered Marcus a secondary income for information about company processes. Marcus had told himself it was harmless. Industry intelligence, the kind of thing that happened all the time. The files he'd been accessing had contained bid information, contract timelines, pending government applications. "I didn't know anyone was going to get hurt," Marcus said. His voice had gone rough. I thought it was just business intelligence." "It was just business intelligence," Aurora said quietly, "until my communications engineer died of a drug overdose he didn't cause." Marcus looked like he'd been hit. "That wasn't—" "I don't know what it was or wasn't," Aurora said, "but I know that information left this company and people used it, and now I have to figure out how much damage has been done." She paused. "I need the name of your contact." Marcus gave it. After he left, suspended, pending investigation, his access credentials revoked in real time by the security system. Aurora sat at her desk for a long moment without speaking. Ethan didn't fill the silence. He'd learned a long time ago that some silences deserved to exist. "He's been my friend," she said finally, not looking for a response, just saying it. "I know," Ethan said. She put her glasses back on and looked at the notebook in front of her. "What's next?" he told her. "Mitch." What was next was a name, Harlan Voss. The consultant Marcus had named was a mid-level operative connected to a corporate intelligence firm called Voss Strategic Solutions, which officially provided competitive analysis and market research, and unofficially did considerably more than that. Ethan ran the name through every available database, public records, professional registries, legal filings, and what came back was a careful, deliberate absence of detail that he recognized immediately. The kind of absence that takes effort to create. He called an old number that night, a number he hadn't called in 2 years. The man who answered was named Danny Reeves, and he'd been Ethan's teammate on 3 deployments, and the fact that he now worked in some capacity for an alphabet agency that Ethan wasn't supposed to know the name of was something neither of them acknowledged directly. "I need a read on someone," Ethan said. "It's 11 p.m., brother." "I know, Harlan Voss, Corporate Intelligence, Seattle area, Voss Strategic Solutions." A pause on the line. "Why?" "Client protection matter." Another pause, longer. "Ethan, the Walker rule is still in effect, right? You're civilian?" "Completely." "Because if that name is involved in whatever you're doing, civilian is the right thing to be." Emphatically. Ethan sat up straighter. "Talk to me." "Not on this line." A pause. "Coffee. Tomorrow. The place on Pike Street, noon. Come alone and leave your phone in the car." The line went dead. Ethan put the phone on the table and looked at the wall for a moment. In the next room, through the thin apartment wall, he could hear the television Sophie had turned on. Some cartoon, the sound just barely audible. The ordinary domestic sound of his life. The sound he'd built his entire existence around protecting. He exhaled slowly. The name Harlan Voss meant something to Danny Reeves, and Danny Reeves was a man who'd operated in the most dangerous corners of the intelligence world for a decade and had seen things that made him largely unsurprisable. If that name made Danny want to meet in person and leave the phones behind, then what Aurora Kensington had stumbled into was not a corporate rivalry. It was something considerably older and darker than that. He checked on Sophie before he went to bed. She was asleep with the library book collapsed across her chest and her reading light still on. He turned the light off and stood there for a moment in the dark, listening to her breathe. He thought about the $47. He thought about the napkin of numbers. He thought about the color of Claire's hair in morning light, a detail that surfaced sometimes without warning. Then he went to bed, because a man who doesn't sleep makes mistakes, and Ethan Walker could not afford mistakes. Not here. Not with Sophie 3 rooms away, and Aurora Kensington's company, and apparently something much bigger, sitting at the center of whatever was coming. He'd walked out of a coffee shop 4 days ago wanting to be nobody. Nobody, it turned out, was harder to stay than it sounded. The meeting with Danny the next day lasted 40 minutes and left Ethan with more questions than answers and a very specific, cold kind of clarity about the size of what he'd walked into. Harlan Voss, as it turned out, was not a consultant. He was a procurement agent, a middleman who moved between legitimate corporate intelligence work and something considerably less legitimate, connecting defense industry clients with each other and occasionally with government officials who had expensive tastes and flexible ethics. He'd been under peripheral watch by 3 different agencies for the better part of 2 years, none of which had been able to get close enough to build an actual case. "Kensington Defense," Danny said, turning a coffee cup in his hands. "She's been winning contracts that certain people wanted, big ones. Long-term encrypted communications infrastructure for government operations. The kind of contracts that redirect a lot of money toward whoever holds them. So this is about contracts. It's always about contracts, man. It's just the size that varies." Danny looked at him. "Whoever's behind Voss isn't playing at sabotage. They've been building something. Patient, methodical, long-term. This isn't grab and run. They want her company, or they want it destroyed. Either way, they don't want it competing. The attack at the cafe was meant to look random. It wasn't. Danny shook his head. Ethan, I'm going to tell you something as a friend. There are people inside agencies, not my shop, but agencies, who are connected to this. Which means if Aurora Kensington goes to certain federal contacts expecting help, she might be walking into the wrong conversation. Ethan absorbed this. Who can she trust? I'll make some calls. Give me 48 hours. Danny looked at him steadily. And you, watch your back. You're associated with her now. That means you're on a list. Ethan drove back to the office through light rain, running numbers in his head. Not financial numbers this time. By the time he reached the 42nd floor, he'd made 3 decisions. First, Aurora needed to know everything he'd learned today, without softening it. Second, the security around her office and her home needed to be completely rebuilt from scratch, because whatever was already in place had clearly been penetrated. Third, and this was the one that sat in his chest with specific, uncomfortable weight, Sophie's school, Sophie's schedule, Sophie's routine, all of it needed to change quietly and immediately before anyone else thought to use his daughter as leverage. He was nobody, he'd told Aurora Kensington 4 days ago in the rain outside a coffee shop. He walked into the elevator and pressed 42 and watched the doors close. He was going to need to be something considerably more than that. He told Aurora everything that afternoon. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. Some people, when they hear bad news of a certain magnitude, need to interject at every point, to push back, to dispute, to perform disbelief as a kind of self-protection. Aurora sat on the other side of her desk and listened to all of it, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the rain-blurred window. "They're not going to stop," she said. It wasn't a question. No. And going to federal authorities might not be safe. Not until Danny identifies who we can trust. That could take a few days. She nodded slowly. What do we do in the meantime? Quietly change everything. Your home security, your car service, your personal route. No patterns. I need you to assume that anything that's been in place longer than 6 months has potentially been compromised. She took that in. My employees, we build a list of people at the company we're certain about. People whose loyalty and circumstances we can verify. We work from inside that circle. We don't share anything outside it. Aurora looked at him for a moment. You've done this before. Some version of it. The classified kind of some version. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She leaned back in her chair. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked tired, actually tired. Not just stretched thin, but genuinely worn down, the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for too long and the weight has finally found them. I built this company so I could do something that mattered, she said. Clean technology, secure communications, things that help people. I didn't... She stopped. I didn't do it to end up in the middle of whatever this is. I know. Do you ever get tired of it? She looked at him directly. The protecting, the watching, the constantly counting the exits. He thought about it honestly. It used to feel like a weight, he said. Now it just feels like how I think. I stopped being able to turn it off a long time ago. Does that bother you? Some days, he said. Most days it just is what it is. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain intensified, running in thick lines down the window glass, blurring the city lights into something almost abstract. Then she said, Your daughter, Sophie. He looked at her carefully. I'm not going to do anything that puts her at risk, Aurora said quickly. I want you to know that I understand what you're risking by being here. It's not just a job to you. You have something to lose. Yes, he said. She nodded. So do I, she said. I have 412 employees and a 15-year-old daughter of my own, and I have been scared for 8 months. She said the last part without apology, matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. I'm glad you're here. It was such a plain, unvarnished thing to say that it landed differently than it might have from someone else. Not a performance, just a statement. I'm going to make some calls, Ethan said, and then tomorrow morning, very early, I need you to let me walk your home perimeter. Is 7 too early? 6, he said. She nodded without complaint. 6. He left her there at her desk with the rain against the windows and the city laid out below her, and rode the elevator down to the lobby and stood in the entrance of the Meridian Tower for a moment looking at the street. Somewhere out there, Harlan Voss was moving pieces on a board. Ethan walked out into the rain. He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Sophie asked him that Friday night while they were eating takeout Thai food on the living room floor because the table was covered in Sophie's art project, an elaborate scale model of the solar system made from styrofoam balls and wire and an alarming amount of glitter. Why he seemed different lately. Different how? He said. You look at the windows more, she said, pointing at him with a chopstick. And you always know where your phone is. You weren't like that before. He was quiet for a second, calibrating. New job has a lot of moving pieces, he said. I'm trying to keep track of things. Sophie considered this, rotating a piece of pineapple on her chopstick thoughtfully. Is it dangerous? No, he said. She gave him the look, the sonar look. It's complicated, he amended, but not dangerous. Dad. What? You know I know when you're doing the thing where you tell me a smaller true thing instead of the big true thing. He looked at her, 9 years old, terrifyingly perceptive. It's a little complicated, he said carefully, but I'm handling it. And you're safe. That part's completely true. She studied him for another moment, then went back to her pineapple. Okay, she said simply. Okay? I trust you. She said it the same way she said promise, like it was a contract, binding and considered. He looked at this small, serious person across a styrofoam solar system and felt the thing he always felt when Sophie blindsided him with something like that. The specific combination of love and responsibility and something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it, the weight of being someone's whole world. I trust you too, Bug, he said. She beamed at him. Now eat your noodles. They're getting cold and cold noodles are sad. He ate his noodles. Outside the apartment window, Seattle's rain kept falling, and somewhere in the city, a man named Harlan Voss was making plans, and Ethan Walker sat on the living room floor surrounded by planets made of styrofoam and glitter, and thought about all the things he was going to have to do before any of this was finished. He ate every last noodle. Sophie would have noticed if he hadn't. Danny's 48 hours turned into 60, and Ethan spent most of that time rebuilding Aurora's security from the ground up the way you'd rebuild a house after a flood. Not patching what was broken, but tearing out everything that had been touched by water and starting with dry material. He walked her home perimeter at 6 on Saturday morning the way he'd promised, and what he found in the first 20 minutes made his jaw tighten in a specific way that Aurora had already learned to read. She walked beside him in the gray early light, hands in her coat pockets, watching his face instead of where he was looking. That bad? She said. Your exterior cameras have a 40-second loop vulnerability on the northeast corner. Someone who knew what they were doing could walk up your driveway and be at your front door before the system registered them. The security company said, the security company is incompetent or compromised. I don't know which yet. He stopped at the corner of the property line, looking at the street. You have a 15-year-old daughter who comes home from school alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Aurora went still beside him. Yes, that stops. It wasn't a suggestion, and they both knew it. Aurora nodded once, and Ethan could see the particular tightness around her eyes that appeared whenever the conversation turned to her daughter. A combination of fear and guilt that he recognized because he'd worn it himself, was still wearing it, would probably always wear it. The fear of being someone's whole world and not being able to guarantee that world's safety. Her daughter's name was Lily, 15, sharp-tongued in the way of teenagers who are actually frightened underneath the attitude, with her mother's eyes and a habit of reading 3 books simultaneously that Aurora found charming and Lily found perfectly logical. She went to Westlake Academy, 45 minutes north, and she'd been living with Aurora full-time for the past 2 years following her parents' divorce. A divorce that, Ethan had gathered from careful, indirect conversation, had been considerably less than amicable. He asked about the ex-husband that afternoon, sitting in Aurora's kitchen while she made coffee. He'd noticed she always made coffee when she needed to do something with her hands during difficult conversations. His name is Richard Kane, she said, with her back to him, watching the coffee brew. We were married for 4 years. He's a venture capitalist. Very successful, very connected, and very certain that the company I built should have been built with him at the center of it. He tried to get involved? He tried to get controlling interest. 3 times through 3 different channels, all of which I blocked. She turned around with 2 cups. The divorce was about a lot of things. That was one of them. Do you think he's involved in what's happening? She set a cup in front of him and sat down across the kitchen island. Her expression was careful. The expression of someone who has thought about something so many times that all the raw edges have worn smooth. I think Richard is capable of a lot of things I spent 4 years convincing myself he wasn't capable of. Whether he's involved in this specifically, she paused. I don't have evidence. I have instinct. Instinct is worth something. From you, I imagine it's worth quite a lot. She wrapped her hands around her cup. He called me last week, said he'd heard I was having security problems and offered to help, said he knew people. Ethan looked at her. What did you say? I said I had it handled. A beat. He laughed. Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. The kitchen was clean and quietly expensive, the kind of space that was functional before it was beautiful, which told him something about who lived in it. A child's drawing, abstract, colorful, clearly old, was tucked behind a magnet on the refrigerator. Lily, probably, from years ago. Aurora had kept it. I'm going to need everything you have on Kane, he said. Financial records, professional connections, anything you kept from the divorce proceedings. I kept everything, Aurora said. I keep everything. She said it without apology or pride. Just fact. He believed her. The files she produced the next morning filled a thumb drive and a physical folder 2 inches thick, and Ethan spent 2 days going through them with the same methodical patience he'd once applied to mission intelligence. Richard Kane was on paper exactly what he appeared to be, a successful venture capitalist with a portfolio of tech investments and a social profile that included charity galas and a membership at the kind of golf club where senators played on weekends. Clean, visible, respectable. But clean and visible, Ethan had learned a long time ago, was exactly what you built when you wanted to be able to hide things underneath it. 3 of Kane's portfolio companies had overlapping board members with a holding firm called Meridian Consolidated Group, which had no obvious products or services but substantial operating accounts. Meridian Consolidated, when Ethan ran the registration paperwork, traced back through 2 layers of holding companies to a registered address in the Cayman Islands. He couldn't go further without resources he didn't have access to anymore. Or rather, resources he'd have to call in a favor to access, which meant owing someone something which he'd been carefully avoiding. He stared at the wall of his conference room, covered in paper and string and notation that the cleaning staff had been politely asked not to disturb, and thought about what Danny had said. Patient, methodical, long-term. This wasn't opportunism. This was architecture. Someone had been building something around Kensington Defense Technologies for a long time, and Aurora had been inside it without knowing, the way you can be inside a structure for years before you realize the walls have been slowly moving inward. He was still thinking about it when his phone rang. Danny. I found your clean contact, Danny said without preamble. Federal level, not agency. Her name is Special Agent Marlene Cross, FBI Financial Crimes. She's been building a case on Voss for 14 months independently, and she's clean. I'd stake my pension on it, and I like my pension. Can Aurora go to her directly? Not yet. Cross needs something to move on first, something concrete enough that she can protect it even if there are dirty hands in the building. She can't open a formal investigation on what you have right now without risking it getting buried. A pause. But she wants to meet, off the record, for now. Set it up. Already did. Thursday. I'll send you the where. The line clicked off, and Ethan sat for a moment looking at the wall. Then he wrote Richard Kane's name in the center of it and drew a line connecting it to Harlan Voss, and stood back and looked at what that line implied. He didn't like what it implied. He went and got more coffee. The week ground forward the way difficult weeks do, not dramatically but steadily, with the particular weight of things being held in careful suspension. Ethan moved Aurora's car service to a rotating pool of vetted drivers. He replaced the northeast corner camera system himself, physically, on a Wednesday evening with a hardware kit he'd bought for cash at a store in Tacoma. He ran quiet background checks on 11 members of Aurora's core staff, looking for financial irregularities, recent large deposits, anything that suggested someone else had gotten to them the way they'd gotten to Marcus Trent. He found nothing alarming, which was either genuinely good news or meant the remaining mole was smarter than Marcus, and both possibilities required vigilance. Aurora, for her part, was adjusting to a changed reality with a pragmatic efficiency that he found himself quietly respecting more each day. She complained exactly once about the new security protocols, specifically about the requirement that she text her location anytime she left the building for more than 15 minutes. And when Ethan explained patiently exactly what the alternative looked like, she stopped complaining and started texting. She wasn't someone who needed the same thing explained twice. He appreciated that more than he'd expected to. What he hadn't expected was how often she ended up in his conference room. It started practically. She had questions about the security restructuring, decisions that needed his input, updates she wanted to give him directly rather than through channels that might be monitored. But it persisted past the practical. She'd appear in the doorway with 2 coffees and a legal pad full of questions, and they'd talk through the threat landscape and the company's exposure and the long list of things that needed to be done. And sometimes the conversation would drift slightly sideways into other territory, into the company's origins, her graduate research, the encryption methodology at the heart of her technology, which she explained in terms that assumed intelligence and got technical fast and didn't apologize for either of those things. He found he didn't mind. She was interesting, which was not something he'd anticipated. Smart in a specific way that showed itself in how she connected things, rather than in how much she knew. She asked him direct questions and accepted direct answers and didn't fill silences with noise. These were qualities he valued in people generally and encountered less often than he'd like. He was also aware, in a peripheral, carefully unpursued way, that she was watching him. Not in a way that created problems, in a way that felt more like assessment, like she was still running the calculation she'd started the morning he'd walked away from her in the rain, still trying to land on an understanding of what exactly he was. He let her watch. He wasn't anything to figure out. He was just a man doing a job. That's what he told himself. The Thursday meeting with Marlene Cross happened in a parking garage in Bellevue at 7 in the morning, which was the kind of meeting venue that announces its own seriousness. Cross was in her early 50s, compact, with short salt and pepper hair and the specific economy of movement that Ethan associated with people who had spent decades in rooms where things mattered. She shook his hand with a dry, firm grip and looked at Aurora with the appraising directness of someone who doesn't waste time on social niceties. "Ms. Kensington," she said, "I've been aware of your company for about 14 months, not because of you, because of the people circling you." "Voss," Aurora said. "Voss is the arm. I'm interested in the body." Cross looked between them. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this garage and doesn't go into any written communication. Understood?" They both nodded. Cross laid it out efficiently, the way people lay things out when they've been carrying them for a long time and finally have someone to hand them to. Harlan Voss operated as a procurement layer between corporate clients and a network she'd been calling, internally, the Consortium, a loose confederation of defense industry investors, former government officials, and at least 2 current ones who had spent the better part of a decade building influence over federal contracting processes. Not dramatically. Not corruptly in any way that was easy to prosecute. Just steadily, methodically, the way water shapes stone, placing people, building relationships, making sure that the contracts went where they wanted them to go. Kensington Defense had become a problem for them 18 months ago, when Aurora had won a major encrypted communications contract that the consortium had spent 18 months positioning one of their own companies to receive. "They don't want to steal your technology," Cross said to Aurora. "They want to neutralize you, drive you out of the market or drive you under, take your government relationships, and fill the space you leave behind." She paused. "The attack at the cafe last week was escalation. Something changed in their timeline. They've accelerated." Aurora absorbed this with a stillness that Ethan recognized as controlled fear. "What changed their timeline?" "You did," Cross said. "You've been quietly building a case internally, haven't you? collecting documentation on the sabotage, the contract interference. Someone inside the consortium found out. Aurora looked at Ethan. He looked back. The files Marcus was accessing, he said. He wasn't just pulling bid information, Aurora said slowly. He was in the document archive. I didn't look closely at which document specifically. He was looking for evidence that you were building evidence, Cross said flatly. They know you know something. That's why the timeline moved. The parking garage was very quiet. Somewhere several levels up, a car door slammed, and the echo moved through the concrete structure like a slow wave. What do you need from us? Ethan said. Right now? Nothing official. I need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Building the record, documenting everything, protecting Ms. Kensington without tipping them off that there's federal interest. If they know I'm looking, they'll go to ground and I'll lose 18 months of work. Cross looked at Ethan directly. And I need you to understand that what you're protecting her from is not a competitor with rough tactics. These are people with resources and patience and connections in places that make standard protection inadequate. I understand that, Ethan said. Cross studied him for a moment. She had the kind of eyes that filed things away permanently. Danny said you were good, she said. He was annoyingly vague about specifics. Danny's careful. So are you, apparently. She handed him a card with only a phone number on it. No name, no agency. Burn phone number. Use it only when you have something I need to act on. Not for check-ins, not for questions, not for anything that can wait. Only when it's time. She shook their hands again and walked back to her car without looking back, and they listened to her engine start and the sound of it fade up the ramp toward daylight. Aurora let out a slow breath. Well, she said. Yeah, Ethan said. They stood there for a moment in the half-dark of the parking structure, and he was aware of how close they were standing, the way you become aware of physical proximity in enclosed spaces with low ceilings and ambient tension. Are you scared? He said. He asked because he wanted an honest answer, not because he needed one. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved instead of deflecting it. Yes, she said. I've been scared for 8 months. I'm better at it now than I was, but it's still there. She looked at him. Are you? No, he said. Then, honestly, concerned. Scared is a different thing for me. What's the difference? Fear makes you freeze. Concern makes you move. He looked at the exit ramp. I'm moving. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Let's go back. They drove separately. That was protocol. The complications that week came from a direction Ethan hadn't been watching closely enough, which was his own apartment. Sophie had been to 2 different after-school pickups by Aurora's assistant, a capable woman named Diane, who Sophie had decided was nice but very organized. And while Sophie had accepted this without major protest, she had questions. Specifically, she had the particular 9-year-old's variety of questions that circle the actual question without landing on it directly, which was its own kind of precision. Is your boss nice? She asked on Thursday evening. She's good at her job, Ethan said. He was making spaghetti, his back to her. That's not the same as nice. She's both. Is she pretty? He turned around. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework with an expression of elaborate casualness. I'm just asking, she said. Why are you asking that? Diane said she's very beautiful. Sophie wrote something in her notebook, not looking up. I just wondered if it was true. Diane talks a lot, Ethan said. Is it true, though? He turned back to the stove. She's my boss, Sophie. That's not a no. That's also not something I'm discussing with a 9-year-old. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, Mackenzie's mom says when grown-ups don't answer a question, it means yes. Mackenzie's mom has strong opinions about a lot of things, Ethan said. He turned the burner down. Eat your vegetables tonight, both the ones I put on your plate. Even the carrots, especially the carrots. She sighed the sigh of someone deeply wronged but magnanimous about it. Fine. He set the spaghetti on the table and sat down across from her, and for a while they ate in the comfortable, slightly chaotic silence of a family dinner that is also a negotiation about vegetables. But under the normalcy of it, something had shifted in the air of the apartment, something too subtle for Sophie to name, and too familiar for Ethan to ignore. The beginning of a thing he wasn't ready to look at directly. He thought about Aurora at her desk at 7 in the evening, glasses on, working. He thought about the way she'd said, "I'm glad you're here," in plain, unperformed. He thought about the drawing on her refrigerator. He ate his spaghetti and helped Sophie with her math homework and did not think about it anymore that night. The second incident came 5 days later, and it was not subtle. Ethan had been walking Aurora's car route to the parking structure when his phone rang. Not his personal cell, but the secondary phone he'd started carrying, a prepaid purchased in cash. Only 2 people had the number. He answered it. Walker, Danny's voice, and in it, immediately, a tension that hadn't been there before. What? "One of Voss's people ran your name this morning. Not deep, not official, but flagged." Ethan stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. A woman with a stroller had to navigate around him and gave him a look. He didn't notice. How deep did they get? Surface, employment history, civilian record, Seattle address. A pause that felt intentional. They don't have SEAL history yet. But Walker, they will look harder now that they started. And when they look harder, they'll find enough to know you're not who you appear to be. And then they'll want to know who sent you. Ethan started walking again, faster now. They'll think Aurora found me. They'll think Aurora is more prepared than they believed. Danny's voice was careful. That might make them accelerate again. Or it might make them more cautious. Yeah, might. The word hung there. Be ready for either one. He walked back to the building quickly, went up to the 42nd floor, and told Aurora in 4 sentences. She listened with her hands flat on her desk. He'd noticed she did that when she was absorbing something she didn't like, pressing her palms down like she was steadying herself against a surface. "So they know about you," she said. "They know a version of me. The civilian version. How long before they know the other version? Days, maybe. A week at the outside." He sat down across from her. "We need to move up the timeline on the documentation Cross needs. Whatever you've been building internally, we need to get it to her faster than we planned. It's not complete. It doesn't need to be complete. It needs to be enough." He leaned forward. "Aurora, they're going to push harder when they realize I'm more than a construction worker. We need to have something in Cross's hands that makes us more valuable protected than targeted." She looked at him steadily. "That's how you think about it? Value of targets?" "It's how they think about it. I'm just doing the math from their side." She was quiet for a moment, and then something shifted in her face. Not defeat, not fear. Something more like the acceptance of a fight that was already underway whether she'd chosen it or not. She opened her laptop. "I have documentation going back 14 months. Sabotage incidents, contract interference, the evidence around David Mercer's death." She paused on the name. The whistleblower, Ethan knew, the one who'd died. "All of it," he said. "Cross needs all of it." "I know." Aurora was already typing. "Give me tonight." He gave her the night. He went home, fed Sophie, read 3 chapters of a book about a girl who discovers she can talk to horses, which Sophie had decided was the most important piece of literature currently in existence, and put her to bed at 9:30 after the usual 10-minute negotiation about why 9:30 was actually a reasonable bedtime. "Did you know horses can sleep standing up?" Sophie said from under her covers. "Yes." "Isn't that crazy?" "Pretty crazy. I don't think I could do that." "Probably not," he agreed. "Dad." "Yeah." A pause. "Are you okay?" He looked at her in the dim light from the hallway, this 9-year-old who asked questions the way some people threw knives, accurate and unannounced. "I'm okay, Bug." "You look tired." "I am a little tired." "You should sleep more." "You should sleep now." She settled deeper into her pillow. "Will you check the window lock?" He crossed the room, checked the window lock. It was locked. It was always locked. He checked it every night, and came back and tucked the blanket more firmly around her shoulders. "Locked. Okay," she said. Her voice was already going soft with sleep. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Sophie." He went back to the living room and sat in the dark for a while, and didn't sleep for another 2 hours. Aurora called him at 11:15. She didn't apologize for the hour, which he didn't expect her to. I found something, she said. He sat up straighter. Talk to me. In the archive Marcus was accessing, I went back through his access log and cross-referenced it with what was actually in those files. He pulled 17 documents over 6 months. I had 12 of those indexed as sensitive but not classified. A pause. The other 5 I didn't know existed. How is that possible? Because I didn't create them. Her voice was controlled in a way that suggested the control was costing her something. Someone with internal access created 5 additional documents in my company's archive over the past 8 months. They're formatted to match our internal records, they're properly time-stamped, but the content... She stopped. Ethan, someone has been building a false paper trail inside my own system. Documents that, if found in discovery, would make it look like I was the one operating outside legal boundaries. The room felt very quiet. They're not trying to drive you out, he said slowly. No, she said. They're trying to frame me. The scale of it rearranged itself in his head. The sabotage, the contract interference, the acceleration, the false documentation. It wasn't just about eliminating a competitor. It was about eliminating a competitor in a way that destroyed her credibility, her company, and her freedom simultaneously. Whatever position the consortium wanted to occupy, they wanted the ground beneath it salted. Send everything to Cross tonight, he said. All of it, including the planted documents. That's what she needs. I know. A pause. Are you going to tell me it's going to be okay? He thought about that honestly. I'm going to tell you that what you just found is the kind of thing that wins cases, he said. If we protect it and get it to the right people. That's not the same as okay. No, he said. It's not. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the ambient sound of her office, the hum of electronics, the faint sound of rain against glass. Thank you, she said. For what? For not lying about it. A pause. Get some sleep. You too. She ended the call, and he sat in the quiet of his living room listening to the familiar sounds of his apartment. The refrigerator hum, the distant traffic, the complete silence from Sophie's room that meant she was actually asleep and not just pretending, and thought about planted documents and false paper trails and a woman 30 floors up in a glass building, building a case against people who had more resources and fewer limits than she did. He thought about the drawing on her refrigerator. He thought about what Danny had said, patient, methodical, long-term. 2 could play at that. He went to the conference room the next morning at 6:30 before anyone else arrived, and he started moving things on the whiteboard, adding names, adding lines, adding the new shape of what they were actually facing. The whiteboard filled up slowly, the way a picture comes clear when you've been staring at static. First the outline, then the structure, then the thing inside the structure that had been there all along. Richard Kane's name stayed in the center. The line between his name and Harlan Voss got thicker. A new line appeared, connecting both of them to a name Ethan had been carrying in the back of his head since the morning in the parking garage, a name Cross had mentioned once and not elaborated on, a name that kept surfacing in the peripheral edges of the financial records like something moving just below water. Senator William Doyle. Armed Services Appropriations Committee. 22 years in office. The kind of man who had been around long enough that his name appeared in connection with many things without ever appearing as the cause of any of them. Ethan drew the line between Doyle's name and the center of the board and stepped back. There it was. The body, as Cross had called it. The arm. Voss. The mechanism. Kane. And at the back of it, present in every financial channel, invisible in every public record, the shape of something with reach and time, and the specific confidence of a man who had never once been asked to account for himself. Ethan picked up his coffee. He was going to need more of it. He was still looking at the board when he heard the elevator open and Aurora came through the glass door, coat still damp from the rain, a coffee tray in her hands. 2 cups, which meant she'd expected him to be here early. She stopped when she saw the board, reading it quickly, her eyes moving across the lines and names with the focused speed of someone who processes information fast. She looked at the senator's name for a long time. You got there too, she said quietly. Yeah. She handed him one of the coffees and stood beside him, looking at the map they'd built together without quite meaning to, the whole visible shape of something that had been designed to be invisible. It's a lot, she said. It is. Can we win? He turned that over honestly, the way he turned everything over, not looking for comfort, looking for accuracy. We have the false documents, he said. We have 14 months of Cross's work. We have the planted evidence, which is actually more useful to us than it was supposed to be for them. And we have Kane's financial trail, which isn't complete yet, but it's getting there. He paused. The question isn't whether we can win. It's whether we can win before they decide the risk isn't worth managing. Aurora looked at him. And if they decide that? Then it gets louder, he said simply, and we deal with loud. She held his gaze for a moment, and he held hers, and in the morning, quiet of the empty conference room with the Seattle rain moving against the windows, something passed between them that neither of them named or moved toward, just the recognition of two people who had been standing in the same fire long enough that they'd stopped needing to explain the heat. Okay, she said, and turned back to the board. Show me what you're thinking. He showed her. They worked through it for the next 2 hours, and by the time the rest of the floor began to fill with the sounds of another workday beginning, they'd built something solid enough to stand on. It wasn't okay. He hadn't promised her okay, but it was a foundation, and right now, that was enough. The foundation held for 11 days. 11 days of careful, deliberate work. Cross-receiving documents in batches through a secure channel Danny had set up, Ethan quietly rebuilding the company's internal security layer by layer. Aurora running her company with the controlled precision of someone who has learned that the best way to not look like you're preparing for war is to look exactly like you're doing your job. 11 days of routine that wasn't routine, of normal, that was a performance of normal, of two people in a glass-walled conference room mapping the edges of something large and dangerous and pretending, to everyone around them, that they were simply working. It was on the 12th day that Richard Kane called Aurora's direct line at 8 in the morning. Ethan was in her office when it happened. They'd developed a habit of the first hour of the day together, going through overnight security logs and whatever Cross had fed back through the channel, a ritual that had become as natural as it was necessary. He watched Aurora look at the screen, watch her expression do the thing it did with Kane's name, a brief, involuntary tightening, like touching something cold. She answered it on speaker without asking him. He appreciated that. Aurora. Kane's voice was the kind of voice that had been professionally smoothed, warm on the surface, with something harder underneath that you felt rather than heard. I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy, Richard. I heard. Security restructuring, staff changes. Word gets around. A pause designed to feel casual. I'm calling as a friend. There are people who are concerned about the direction you're taking things. I've been asked to relay that concern. Asked by whom? People who care about the company's stability. Aurora, you're making moves that look reactive. It's creating uncertainty in your investor relationships. My investor relationships are fine. Some of them. Another pause. I want to help you. I've said that before. There are resources available to you. Support, partnership, someone in your corner who understands this industry. All you'd have to do is... Stop there, Aurora said. Her voice stayed level. Whatever you're about to say, Richard, don't. I'm not interested in your resources or your partnerships, and I'm not going to be. A silence on the line, longer than the others. When Kane spoke again, the warmth had dropped about 10 degrees. You're being stubborn about this. I'm being clear about this. There's a difference. Aurora, I have a meeting. Goodbye, Richard. She ended the call and set the phone down and looked at the desk for a moment, and Ethan watched the controlled exhale she did. Barely visible, the kind of breath that does the job of a bigger reaction that she'd decided not to have. He's probing, Ethan said. I know. He wanted to see if the restructuring spooked you enough to make you receptive. I know that too. She looked up. He said, people who care about the company's stability. More than one person directed him to make that call. Consortium is using him as a front channel, testing whether you're alone in this or whether someone's advising you. Did I give anything away? Ethan considered. No. You were good. She looked at him steadily. I spent 4 years learning how to have conversations with Richard without giving anything away. It's possibly the most useful thing that marriage taught me. He didn't say anything to that because there wasn't anything useful to say, and Aurora moved on from it the way she moved on from most things that were painful. Not dramatically, just decisively, the way you close a door that you know you'll have to open again eventually and are trying to stay ahead of. Cross needs the Meridian Consolidated financials, Ethan said. I know, I'm working on it. She pulled up a document on her laptop. I have a contact at the SEC. Not official, just someone I've worked with on compliance before. She's been quietly pulling the public filings. There's a pattern in the quarterly transfers that she says. His phone buzzed on the table, the secondary one. They both looked at it. He picked it up. A text from the number he'd set up for Diane, Aurora's assistant, who had Sophie pickup duty that afternoon. One word, problem. He was on his feet before the second text came through. Sophie's school called. She didn't come in this morning. Ethan, she's not here. The room went sideways in a specific way that he'd felt before. Not panic, something colder and more precise than panic. The absolute narrowing of the world to a single point. His training kicked in before his fear could. He was already moving, already pulling up Sophie's location on the parental tracking app he'd installed on her phone 6 months ago and never once needed. The dot on the map was not at school. It was not at home. It was moving. Slowly, inconsistently, a few blocks east of the school, near the waterfront. Ethan! Aurora had come around the desk. She was reading his face. What happened? Sophie. He was already at the door. She's not at school. Her phone's moving near the waterfront. Aurora didn't hesitate. Take my car. Marcus, the driver, not Trent. The new one. He's downstairs. He knows the city. Go. I need you to call Cross. Already doing it. Go. He went. The elevator ride down was the longest 40 seconds of his life, and he spent it looking at the moving dot on his phone screen and doing math. How long she'd been missing, how far she could have moved on foot, whether the dot's movement was Sophie moving or the phone being moved by someone else. And underneath all of that, underneath the tactical thinking, a sound he couldn't quite suppress. Something that wasn't quite thought and wasn't quite feeling, but existed in the place where the two met. Not her, not Sophie, not her. The driver, a compact quick man named Ray, who Ethan had vetted himself 3 weeks ago, had the car moving before Ethan's door was fully closed. Waterfront, Ethan said. East of Westlake Academy, 2 blocks, fast but not flashy. Ray drove. The dot had stopped moving. He called Sophie's cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her recorded voice, chirpy and matter-of-fact. Hi, this is Sophie. I'm probably reading. Leave a message. He hung up and called again. Same result. He called her classroom directly. Mrs. Harrington answered on the second ring and confirmed what Diane's text had said. Sophie had not arrived this morning. The school had called his cell at 8:45, the cell he'd accidentally left on silent during the morning security review, and had then called the emergency contact, which was Diane. 8:45. It was 9:20 now, 35 minutes. Did anyone see her leave the building this morning? He asked Mrs. Harrington. The morning aide saw her get dropped off by a car, not the bus. She came through the gate. Who dropped her off? I didn't drop her off. A pause. I'm not sure, Mr. Walker. The aide just noted that she arrived by car. I can ask, please do that right now and call this number back. He ended the call and looked at Ray. Someone drove her to school this morning. I didn't. Ray's eyes moved to the rearview mirror briefly. You want me to keep going to the dot? Yes, but careful on the last block. They pulled up 2 blocks from the waterfront and Ethan was out before the car stopped, moving on foot, phone in hand, watching the dot. Stationary. He was 40 feet from it now, 30, 20. And then he turned a corner into a narrow space between 2 buildings and saw Sophie sitting on a low concrete ledge with her backpack between her feet, phone in her lap, talking to a girl he didn't recognize. He stopped. He made himself stop and assess before he moved, because moving without assessing was how you made situations worse. Sophie looked physically fine. No distress in her posture, no sign of restraint, no one near her who looked like a threat. The girl she was talking to was a teenager, maybe 16, with red-dyed hair and headphones around her neck, sitting on a bicycle. Sophie looked up and saw him. "Dad?" she said, and immediately, from the expression on his face, "I'm sorry." He crossed the distance between them and crouched down to her level, and he put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her. Looked at every inch of her, and she was fine. She was completely physically fine. And the 35 minutes between 8:45 and 9:20 collapsed into something he filed away carefully to deal with later when he was alone. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Dad, I'm really sorry. I know I should have." "Are you hurt anywhere?" "No, I'm okay. She looked at the other girl. "This is Jess. She goes to Westlake, too. She showed me this spot because I was upset, and I wanted to think, and I know I should have called, but my phone was almost dead and—" "Sophie." He kept his voice even. "Who drove you to school this morning?" She blinked. "What?" "You took the bus yesterday. This morning someone drove you. Who was it?" She looked confused. "Mrs. Patterson from next door. She was going that way and offered. I thought it was okay because you say she's fine." "Mrs. Patterson," he repeated. "Yeah. Her car's the blue one. You've seen it." He released a breath that was so controlled it was almost silent. He sat down on the ledge next to her, and for a moment he just sat there with his daughter while the secondary phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably Cross, probably Aurora, probably three things that needed immediate attention. And he looked at the narrow strip of sky above the space between the buildings, gray and specific and real. "You skipped school," he said. "I was upset," Sophie said. Small voice. "Mackenzie said something mean about Mom." He looked at her. "She said—" Sophie's jaw tightened, 9 years of dignity trying to hold a line. "She said that kids who don't have moms are sad and weird, and that's why I'm like that." Something went through him that was quiet and sharp and had nothing to do with the consortium or Harlan Voss or Richard Kane's smooth telephone voice. He put his arm around Sophie's shoulders, and she leaned against him, and the teenager with the red hair politely found something else to look at. "You're not sad and weird," he said. "I know," Sophie said. Her voice was slightly thicker than normal. "You're the opposite of sad and weird." "I know, Dad." Dad." "What?" "You don't have to list things. I just needed a minute." He pulled her a little closer. "Okay," he said. "Take your minute." She did, leaning against his arm, and he sat with her in the narrow space between buildings near the Seattle waterfront while his phone buzzed and the city made its city sounds around them, and he thought about the fact that he'd spent 35 minutes in the worst possible version of his own imagination, and here she was, perfectly fine, upset about something that mattered to her in the way that 9-year-old things matter, completely, without proportion, the way all real grief operates. "We're going to talk about the skipping school part later," he said. "I know." "And the leaving your phone on silent part." "I know. But right now I'm just—" He stopped. He wasn't good at saying the thing directly. He'd never been good at that. "I'm glad you're okay." Sophie looked up at him. She studied his face for a moment with the accuracy she always brought to that activity. "You were scared," she said. "I was concerned," he said. She put her head back against his arm. "You were scared," she repeated gently, like she was giving him something. He didn't argue with her. He called Aurora from the car on the way to drop Sophie at school late, with a note already composed in his head for Mrs. Harrington about a family matter that had delayed the morning, which was technically true. "She's fine," he said, before Aurora could ask. "She wasn't taken. She left on her own. She was upset about something at school." The silence on Aurora's end had about 2 seconds of something in it, something that released, before she got practical again. "Cross is waiting for our call." "I know, 20 minutes. "Okay." A pause. "Ethan." "Yeah." "I'm glad she's okay." He glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophie was looking out the window, backpack in her lap, already composing herself back into the version of herself that went to school and dealt with people who said unkind things and got on with it because she was her mother's daughter in the ways that mattered. "Me too," he said. He dropped her at the school gate and watched her until she was through the door, and then he sat for 30 seconds doing nothing, which was all he allowed himself, and drove back downtown. The call with Cross was short and not good. Cross had received the Meridian financials from Aurora's SEC contact, and what she'd found had changed her timeline. The quarterly transfer pattern wasn't just evidence of money moving between shell companies. It was evidence of money moving in coordination with specific federal contract announcements. The timing was too precise to be coincidental, which meant Cross had what she needed to connect Voss to Kane to Doyle in a way that would survive a federal courtroom. Which meant, Cross explained with the flat economy of someone delivering a forecast rather than an opinion, that they were now at the most dangerous point. "When people with a lot to lose realize they're about to lose it," she said, "they do one of two things. They run, or they eliminate the threat. People like this don't run." "They'll come at Aurora directly," Ethan said. "They'll come at everything she has, her company, her reputation, and the people close to her." A pause. "I need 48 hours to get this in front of a federal judge and get protection orders in place. I need you to keep her airtight until then." 48 hours, Ethan said. "I know," Cross said. "I know what I'm asking." He spent the first of those 48 hours rebuilding the physical security around Aurora's life with a completeness that left no room for the gaps he'd found 6 weeks ago. He pulled in 2 people he trusted from his SEAL years. Not through official channels, nothing that left a record, just calls to men who owed him and whose judgment he'd trusted in conditions where bad judgment got people killed. They came quietly, they understood the parameters, and they took positions without needing to be explained twice. The second thing he did was call the school and arrange for Sophie to be held inside the building that afternoon, with a specific staff member designated to stay with her until Ethan could physically collect her. He did this without telling Sophie why, which meant he'd have to explain it eventually, which was a conversation he was not looking forward to. The third thing he did was tell Aurora. "They're going to make a move in the next 48 hours, he said. They were in her office, door closed, the city gray and wet behind her. "Cross is working as fast as she can. Until she has the protection orders in place, we need to operate on the assumption that they know what we have." "Do they?" "I don't know, but I'd rather prepare for the version where they do." Aurora was quiet for a moment, looking at her desk. She'd been in back-to-back meetings all morning. He could see it in the slight tension across her shoulders, the way her hair had been pushed back rather than arranged, the coffee cup that had been refilled at least 3 times. She was running a company and a crisis simultaneously, and doing both with a competence that he'd stopped finding surprising 2 weeks ago and had started finding something else instead, something he wasn't naming. "Lily's at school," she said. "I know. I've already talked to Westlake's security office. She's to be kept in the building until you personally collect her." He paused. "With me. You want to come?" "Yes." She looked at him. "Ethan, that's 45 minutes each way. You'd be away from the building." "I have 2 people covering the building. I need to be with you and Lily until this is resolved." She held his gaze for a moment, and in it he could see the particular internal negotiation that happened when someone who was used to managing everything themselves had to accept that right now, managed everything themselves wasn't enough. "Okay," she said. They picked Lily up at 3:30. Ethan drove, Aurora in the passenger seat, and the ride up to Westlake was mostly quiet, the kind of quiet where both people in a car are separately aware of how much neither of them is saying and have decided by unspoken agreement not to say it. Lily came through the school's front entrance with the specific controlled displeasure of a 15-year-old who has been told she needs to be walked out by her mother, and the intimidating man who'd apparently been her mother's shadow for the past month. She had Aurora's eyes and an expression that managed to convey several things simultaneously: annoyance at the inconvenience, curiosity about what was actually happening, and underneath both of those, a teenager's accurate, unspoken awareness that something was wrong. She got in the back seat without speaking. Ethan drove. After 2 minutes, Lily said, "Can someone tell me what's going on, or are we just doing the ominous silence thing all the way home?" "Something's happening at work," Aurora said. "We're being careful." What kind of something? The kind that means I need you close to me right now. A pause. Are you in danger? We're being careful, Aurora repeated. Her voice was even. Ethan noticed it had a specific register when she was talking to Lily. Still controlled, but underneath it, something more open, something that didn't entirely close off. Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "Is he like a bodyguard?" "Among other things," Aurora said. Another pause. "Is he good at it?" "Yes," Aurora said. Lily absorbed this. Then, to Ethan, directly, "What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan what?" "Walker." "How long have you been doing this?" He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was watching him with the focused, evaluating attention of her mother. Same eyes, same directness. Though in the teenager it had a sharper edge. The edge of someone who has learned that adults aren't always honest and has decided to develop her own detection system. "Long enough," he said. "That's a non-answer." "Yeah," he agreed. A beat. "Are you actually going to keep her safe?" "Lily," Aurora started. "I'm asking him," Lily said. Not rude, but firm. Ethan met her eyes in the mirror. "Yes," he said. Lily held his gaze for a moment through the mirror, doing the assessment, running whatever algorithm a 15-year-old runs when deciding if a stranger can be trusted. He didn't look away. He let her look. "Okay," she said finally, and settled back in her seat. Aurora didn't say anything, but from the peripheral edge of his vision, he saw something ease slightly in the set of her shoulders. They reached Aurora's house, and he cleared the perimeter before he let either of them out of the car, a habit that Lily watched from the back window with the kind of absorbed attention that told him she was filing it away. He brought them inside and walked the interior while they stood in the foyer, Aurora patient, Lily watching everything. He'd been through the house enough times to know it in the specific way you know spaces that matter. The blind corner in the kitchen, the second-floor landing that could be seen from 2 windows, the back door whose lock was newer than the frame and needed checking. He checked everything, and when he came back to the foyer, he found Aurora in the kitchen making tea and Lily sitting at the kitchen island with her school bag and a look on her face that had softened slightly from the controlled neutrality of the car. "There's leftover soup," Aurora said to Ethan, "from last night. You should eat something." "I'm fine." "You haven't eaten since this morning. I noticed." He looked at her. "You noticed." "I noticed things. We've established this." She set a bowl on the counter with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone doing an ordinary domestic thing, which it was, except that it was also Aurora Kensington in her kitchen handing him soup, and the ordinariness of it landed with a small, unexpected weight. Lily watched this exchange with the peripheral attention of a teenager pretending to look at her phone. He ate the soup. It was good. Actually good. Not politely good. He said so because not saying so felt strange. "It's just minestrone," she said. "The barley makes it." "Barley," he repeated. "You sound surprised that I cook." "Billionaires who cook," Lily said from her phone, "are a specific type." "Don't editorialize," Aurora said. "I'm just saying." Ethan finished the soup, and the 3 of them existed in the kitchen for a while in a configuration that felt oddly, tentatively, like something. Like the rough sketch of something, the way a room looks before the furniture is in the right place. He was aware of it and didn't know what to do with the awareness, so he filed it under later and went back to watching the windows. The call came at 11:17 that night. He was downstairs, Aurora and Lily both in their rooms, the house locked and covered when his phone rang. The personal cell. Sophie's school contact number. His stomach dropped, and then he read the ID properly. It wasn't the school's main line. It was the cell number of Mrs. Harrington, Sophie's teacher, calling from her personal phone at 11 at night. He answered it. "Mr. Walker." Her voice was tense in a way that teachers' voices weren't supposed to be. "I'm sorry to call so late. I wanted to make sure Sophie got home okay today. She's safe." "She's home," he said carefully. "Why?" A pause. "A man came to the school this afternoon, after hours. He said he was Sophie's uncle and that there'd been a family emergency and he needed her pickup information, her home address, your contact details, after-school schedule. The receptionist said she couldn't provide that, but she said he was very insistent. Another pause. She didn't give him anything, but she was shaken enough that she told me, and I wanted to make sure Sophie was... She's home, he said again. She's safe. Mrs. Harrington, I need a description of this man. She gave him what she had, secondhand from the receptionist, mid-40s, gray jacket, no tie, an accent she couldn't place. Nothing that identified anyone specifically, but everything that confirmed what it was. They were using Sophie. They'd found his civilian record, found the daughter, and they were moving to the next pressure point. He ended the call and sat very still for 10 seconds, running the math with the cold precision that he hated having and couldn't function without. Sophie was home. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been doing the evening check-in while Ethan was covering Aurora, which he'd arranged this morning. He called Mrs. Patterson's cell, and she answered immediately and confirmed that Sophie had eaten dinner, done homework, and gone to bed on time and was fine. He hung up and called Danny. They came to Sophie's school, he said when Danny answered. The silence on the line was the specific silence of a man who understands immediately what that means. How close did they get? Not close, but close enough to know she exists, where she goes to school, that she's leverage. Ethan, Danny's voice was careful. You need to move her. I know. Tonight. I know. He was already calculating. The apartment would be watched now, or would be soon. He needed to move Sophie without anyone watching the school or the apartment being able to track where she went. He needed somewhere off the grid of his known life, known contacts, known routines. He went upstairs and knocked on Aurora's bedroom door. She opened it within 30 seconds, which meant she'd been awake. She was still dressed. He'd suspected she hadn't been sleeping much. He told her in 2 sentences. She didn't hesitate. Bring Sophie here, she said. Tonight. She stays here with us until this is over. Aurora. There are 4 bedrooms. My security is better than your apartment buildings. And she stopped, and something honest moved through her expression. I don't want her alone in that apartment. I don't want you worrying about her being there when you need to be thinking about other things. He looked at her in the dim hallway light, this woman who had spent 2 months under siege and had not once complained about the fear in any way that asked for something in return, who had just offered his daughter a room in her house at 11:30 at night without blinking. It'll disrupt your household, he said. My household is currently a 15-year-old and a man who eats soup standing up, she said. I think we can handle a 9-year-old. Something moved through his chest that he recognized, acknowledged, and set aside for a later that was going to have to come eventually. I'll go get her, he said. I'll have the room ready. He drove to the apartment at 11:30 and woke Mrs. Patterson to explain that he was taking Sophie for a sleepover that he'd forgotten to mention, which Mrs. Patterson accepted with the phlegmatic generosity of a woman who had lived next door to a widowed father for 2 years and had learned not to ask questions that weren't her business. Sophie was harder to manage. Dad. She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, backpack on because he'd told her to pack one, her hair loose, and her eyes the specific squint of a person who is deeply suspicious but too tired to fully interrogate. Where are we going? A friend's house. What friend? You don't have friends. I have a few. Name one. Danny. Danny is in Tacoma. Is this Danny's house? No. She narrowed her eyes further. Is this your boss's house? He picked up her bag. Come on. Dad, is this your boss's house? Sophie. Because if it is, I need to fix my hair. He looked at her, 9 years old, standing in the hallway at 11:30 at night in dinosaur pajamas, and still principally concerned with her hair. Something cracked open in him that was painful and hilarious and enormous. Your hair's fine, he said. My hair's not fine. It's a disaster. Can I have 1 minute, he said, and then we're going. He stood in the hallway and listened to the sounds of Sophie in the bathroom, the water running, the protest of a brush through tangled hair, a small O, and kept one eye on the apartment door and the other on the window and thought about the 36 hours remaining in Cross's timeline and what they needed to survive them. They arrived at Aurora's house at midnight. Aurora opened the door before they reached it, which meant she'd been watching. She was still dressed, and she looked from Ethan to Sophie, and Sophie looked back up at her, and the two of them regarded each other in the porch light for a moment. Sophie said, "Your house is very big." "It is," Aurora agreed. "Is that okay?" Sophie considered it. "Are there snacks?" "Sophie," Ethan started. "There are snacks," Aurora said. "Are you hungry?" "I had dinner, but that was like 6 hours ago." "Then come in." Sophie went in, and Ethan stood on the porch for one more second, looking at the dark street, counting the things he could see and estimating the things he couldn't, running the perimeter in his head. Then he went inside and closed the door behind him. And in the kitchen, he could already hear Sophie explaining to Aurora with 9-year-old thoroughness the specific and non-negotiable distinctions between regular crackers and the good crackers, and Aurora responding with a patience that sounded entirely genuine rather than performed. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, looked down at the scene in the kitchen, and looked at Ethan at the bottom of the stairs. "Is that the little girl?" she said quietly. "That's Sophie." Lily watched Sophie gesturing at a cabinet Aurora had opened. "She's kind of intense." "She's 9. I was not like that at 9. "I bet you were exactly like that at 9, Ethan said. Lily almost smiled. "Not quite." "Maybe," she conceded and went back to her room. He checked the house one more time, so all 4 walls, all entry points, the alarm system, the 2 men he had covering the perimeter outside. He did it methodically and thoroughly, the way he did everything, and when he was done, he stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and watched through the doorway. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen island eating crackers, apparently the good ones, and telling Aurora about the Mackenzie situation with the kind of detailed, earnest narrative that Sophie brought to things she was still working out emotionally. Aurora was listening with her elbows on the counter and her full attention, not doing the thing adults sometimes did with children where they halfway listen while thinking about something else, but actually listening, asking questions at the right moments, letting Sophie say the whole thing. Sophie didn't have a lot of adults who did that besides Ethan. He stood in the hallway and watched his daughter be listened to and felt the complicated, specific weight of something he didn't have a clean name for: gratitude, and something heavier than gratitude, something that pulled toward a future he hadn't let himself look at directly. He didn't let himself look at it now. He went back to the window and watched the street and counted the hours to cross his timeline and let the sound of his daughter's voice telling a story in someone else's kitchen be the thing that kept the fear in the right place, which was useful and controlled and not in charge. 34 hours. He just needed 34 more hours. But the thing about plans built on time was that the other side had plans too, and theirs didn't require anyone's permission, and the night outside was very quiet in the specific way that nights are quiet right before something breaks through them. He watched the street. He didn't sleep. The 34 hours didn't hold. It broke at 4:17 in the morning, which is the hour when human alertness is at its lowest, and people who plan violence know it. Ethan was at the kitchen table with cold coffee and the secondary phone when the alert came through. Not an alarm, not a notification, but a text from one of the 2 men he'd stationed outside. A former SEAL named Garrett, whose texts were always short and never wrong. 3 vehicles. Northeast approach. Not police. He was moving before he finished reading it. He took the stairs 2 at a time, no lights, navigating Aurora's house in the dark the way he'd memorized it 3 days ago, precisely for this. The landing, the left turn, Aurora's door first because it was closer. He knocked twice, hard, and opened it without waiting. "Get up," he said. "Now, don't turn on lights." Aurora was already sitting up. She'd been sleeping in her clothes, he noticed. Not because she'd known, but because this was apparently how she slept now, which told him something about what the last 8 months had done to her. She was on her feet before he'd finished speaking. "Lily," she said. "I'll get her. You go to Sophie's room, you stay with her. You don't open any windows, and you don't make noise. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Aurora." He caught her arm in the dark briefly. "I need you to trust me for the next few minutes without asking questions." She was close enough that he could see her face in the ambient light from the window, and what was on it was fear and something harder than fear, something that looked like decision. "I trust you," she said. "Go." He went to Lily's room and found her already awake. Not from any sound he'd made, but apparently from some adolescent proximity to danger awareness, sitting in her bed with her phone dark in her hand and her eyes open. "What's happening?" she said. Not a question exactly, a statement with a question mark attached. "People outside who shouldn't be. I need you to go to your mom's room right now, quietly, and stay there with her and Sophie." "Sophie?" Lily processed this. "The little girl is here?" "Yes. Go." He paused. "Lily, listen to your mother." Something moved across her face, the specific, involuntary expression of a teenager who has been told for 2 years to listen to your mother and has resisted it on principle, now hearing it from a different source in a completely different context. She got out of bed. He went back downstairs. Garrett was at the back door when Ethan reached it, having come through the perimeter at the agreed point. He was a big man, quiet in the specific way of people who have spent time in environments where noise had consequences, and his expression right now was the particular focused blankness of full operational alertness. 3 vehicles stopped a block east, Garrett said, low. I counted 6 men. They're not rushing. They're staging. They're waiting for something, Ethan said. Signal, probably. They've got comms. Coordinated approach, then. They're hitting multiple points. Ethan looked at the kitchen, the stairs, the front of the house in his head. Where's Kowalski? Front, staying back. They haven't moved yet. 6 men, 3 vehicles, coordinated comms, staging behavior. This wasn't improvised. This was a team, the kind that got hired for specific outcomes. And the outcome they'd been hired for was making sure that the evidence Aurora had assembled and the case Cross was building never reached a federal judge's courtroom. He called Cross. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake too, which meant she'd known something like this was possible. We have a problem, he said. How many? 6 visible. More possible. Location? He gave her the address. She was already moving when she said, 20 minutes for my people to reach you. Maybe 15. We may not have 15. I know. Her voice had the flat, fast quality of someone multitasking at high speed. Can you hold? Yes, he said. He said it without qualification because qualification took time. He didn't have, and because the alternative answer was not one he intended to make true. He ended the call and looked at Garrett. 20 minutes. Garrett nodded once. He didn't say anything about 20 minutes being a long time. They both knew how long 20 minutes was. They'd both spent time in places where 20 minutes was an entire story, with a beginning and a middle and a result that went one way or the other. They move, we move, Ethan said. Primary objective is the house. Nobody gets in. Understood. He went upstairs and told Aurora through her closed door. Federal backup is coming. 15 to 20 minutes. Stay in that room and do not open the door for anyone until you hear my voice. How will I know it's you? Aurora said from the other side. You'll know, he said, and then, because that was not actually a useful answer, I'll say the name of the soup. A brief silence. The minestrone? Yes. Another silence. Ethan. Her voice was quiet and even, and carried somehow more weight through a closed door than it would have in person. Be careful. He didn't answer that one. He went back downstairs. They came at 4:29, not all at once. That was the first thing he registered, the thing that told him these were professionals rather than opportunists. 2 men at the front, visible, obvious, the kind of approach that was designed to pull attention. 1 man at the back, quieter, the real point of entry for someone who didn't know that Garrett was already positioned there. And 1 man who went to the side of the house, to the window of the small study on the ground floor, and began working the frame with a tool that suggested he'd done this before. Ethan let him get the window halfway up before he reached through and grabbed his wrist. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean or cinematic. It was cramped and fast, and involved a great deal of controlled violence in the dark, the kind that leaves bruises on the person delivering it as well as the person receiving it, because close-quarter situations don't spare anyone the physics. The man at the window went down. The man at the back met Garrett, And that was a brief exchange that Garrett ended with the efficiency of someone doing arithmetic rather than fighting. The two at the front were more complicated. They'd gotten to the door, and one of them had a breaching tool, and the sound of it hitting the frame was loud in the pre-dawn quiet of the street. Ethan came through the front of the house at speed and took the breaching man's arm at the moment he swung, redirecting the momentum in a way the man's shoulder was not prepared for. The second man had a handgun out, and Ethan was inside his arm's reach before he could use it properly, and the gun went to the floor and the man went to the porch railing, which held but just barely. He heard sirens at 4:33. The two men on the porch heard them too, and made the calculation that professionals make when the math stops working in their favor. They ran. Ethan let them go, chasing them into the dark street when federal vehicles were 30 seconds out was not a good trade, and went back inside the house and stood in the entry hall breathing through his nose, inventorying himself for damage. His left forearm ached where the breaching tool had caught it. His knuckles were scraped. His ear was ringing slightly from a strike he'd taken in the close-quarters exchange that he'd accepted in order to make a more important point with his elbow. None of it was serious. All of it was going to be obvious tomorrow. He went to the bottom of the stairs. "Minestrone," he said. Silence. Then Aurora's voice from behind her door, "Coming down." The next hour was loud and institutional in the way that federal response is loud and institutional. Vehicles, agents, chain of command being established, the particular bureaucratic-controlled chaos of law enforcement arriving at a scene and trying to understand what they'd arrived at. Cross was there within 25 minutes, moving through it all with the contained authority of someone who had been building to this moment for 14 months and was not going to let the moment get away from her. She found Ethan at the kitchen table with ice on his forearm and a glass of water he hadn't touched. 3 in custody, she said, sitting across from him. The other 3 are in the wind, but we have plates and we'll have them by morning. She looked at his arm. You need that looked at? It's fine. You're going to say that's fine for 24 hours and then go to a doctor, aren't you? Probably. She studied him with the same filing everything away eyes she always had. You held 6 people with 2 men for 16 minutes. Garrett did his share. That's not the point I'm making. She set her hands flat on the table. The men we have in custody, they're not Voss's usual network. They're outside contractors. Someone hired them specifically for tonight, and that escalation tells me someone panicked. Kane, Ethan said, almost certainly. Voss is careful. He doesn't do this kind of thing directly. But Kane has been getting more aggressive, and he has money to spend. She paused. This is actually good for us. Walk me through how 6 men trying to breach a house at 4 in the morning is good for us. Because they didn't get what they came for. The evidence is intact, the witnesses are alive, and the men in custody are going to be looking at federal charges serious enough that at least one of them is going to want a conversation about who hired them. Cross leaned forward. I have enough to move now. The judge is expecting my call at 6 a.m. By noon, we'll have warrants. Ethan absorbed this. Kane, Voss, and everything connecting them to Doyle. All of it moves today. He looked at the untouched glass of water. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the incremental way of November dawns. Not dramatically, just the darkness thinning by degrees until gray replaced black, and you could see the shapes of things again. Aurora needs to know, he said. Bring her in, Cross said. I want to talk to her directly. He went upstairs. Aurora's door was open and she was inside with Lily and Sophie, all 3 of them on the bed in the way that people end up gathered together after frightening things. Not by plan, just by the gravitational pull of being in the same space and needing to be near other people. Sophie was against Aurora's side with her knees pulled up, not asleep, but not fully awake either, in that suspended state children sometimes achieve after being frightened and then told they're safe but not quite believing it yet. Lily was at the foot of the bed with her phone face down beside her, which meant she'd been paying attention rather than hiding in it. Ethan stood in the doorway. Aurora looked at him. She looked at his arm, at his face, at his hands. He watched her do the assessment. You're hurt, she said. Superficially. Is it over? The immediate part. Cross needs to speak with you. She looked at Sophie, who had registered his presence, and turned to look at him with the specific expression of a child who has been told not to be scared but is still running the internal numbers. "You okay, Bug?" he said. Sophie considered this seriously. "I wasn't scared," she said. "I know. I was maybe a little scared. That's okay." "Lily held my hand," Sophie said. She said this with a certain matter-of-factness that was also underneath a report on something important. He looked at Lily, who was looking at the wall with the elaborate uninvestedness of someone who has done something kind and is not interested in it being commented on. "Thank you," he said to her. Lily shrugged. "She was scared," she said, as if this fully explained and concluded the matter. Aurora kissed Sophie's hair and extricated herself from the bed carefully, and they went downstairs and left the girls in the room with the door open and the hallway light on, which Sophie had requested and no one had argued with. The conversation with Cross took 40 minutes. Aurora sat at her kitchen table and went through everything: the full chain of documentation, the planted files, the Meridian financials, the timeline of incidents from the first sabotage to the breach attempt 4 hours ago, with the organized clarity of someone who had been waiting to say all of this to the right person for a very long time. Cross listened and recorded and asked the sharp, specific questions that told Ethan she already knew most of the answers and was building the record rather than building the knowledge. When it was done, Cross gathered her notes and stood. "By tonight," she said to Aurora, "this will be in front of a federal judge. By tomorrow morning, the warrants will move. I need you somewhere secure until the arrests are made. Could be 12 hours, could be 36. "Here," Aurora said. "Here is compromised. We'll arrange a location." Cross looked at Ethan. "I'd like to keep you involved. Civilian, informal, but I want to know where you are." "He doesn't go anywhere without us knowing," Ethan said. "The girls stay together." Cross nodded. Agreed. After she left, the house went quiet, in the way houses go quiet after a lot of noise. The federal agents pulling back, the vehicles moving off, the street returning to the ordinary stillness of early morning. Ethan checked the front door, the back, the window in the study that had been partially breached and now had a piece of board wedged in the frame. He checked the perimeter once more. Garrett was still out there, tireless and uncomplaining, the way good people who've been trained well tend to be. He came back to the kitchen and found Aurora making coffee. It was 5:58 in the morning. Through the kitchen window, the sky had moved from gray to a pale, watery almost light. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said, without turning around. "I need something to do with my hands." He sat down. She brought 2 cups and sat across from him, and they were quiet for a moment, in the particular way that people are quiet together after something difficult. Not the silence of nothing to say, but the silence of too much that doesn't need saying because the person across from you was there too. "It's going to work," she said. Not a question this time. "Yes," he said. Cross sounded certain. "Cross has been building this case for 14 months. She's been waiting for something to crack their timeline. Last night cracked it." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "When they sent 6 men to a residential address in the middle of the night, they stopped being a careful, patient network and started being desperate. Desperate people make discoverable mistakes." Aurora looked at him. "You made them desperate." "We made them desperate. The documentation you built, the financial records your contact pulled, the planted files. You kept me alive long enough to build it," she said. He didn't have a ready response to that, which was unusual. She held his gaze across the kitchen table in the early morning, and in it was everything the past 2 months had been. The $47, the cafe, the whiteboard, the parking garage, the soup, the minestrone, 4:17 in the morning, and everything that followed, and she wasn't performing any of it, wasn't editorializing, just holding it in her eyes the way she held most things, directly, without looking away. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. When this is over..." She stopped, started again more carefully. "I know you took this job because you needed the money, and I needed someone who could actually do it. And I know that's been the frame for all of this." She paused. "But I want you to know that it stopped being that for me a while ago." He looked at her. I don't know exactly when, she said. Maybe the soup? Maybe before the soup. The corner of her mouth moved just slightly in the way it did when something was both serious and absurd simultaneously. I'm not making a speech. I wanted to say it when we're both awake and no one is trying to break down a door. He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have something to say, but because he wanted to say it right, and saying things right had never been his strength. It stopped being just a job for me too, he said, a while ago. She nodded, accepting it, not pressing it further, which was exactly the right thing to do. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They drank their coffee, and upstairs they could hear the sounds of Lily and Sophie beginning to be awake. Low voices, a laugh that was Sophie's, a shushing sound that was probably Lily being older and more dignified about it. And the kitchen was warm, and the coffee was good, and outside the window Seattle was pulling itself slowly, reluctantly toward morning. The safe house Cross arranged was a federal property in Bellevue. Not dramatic, not a compound, just a house on a regular street that had been used for witness protection situations before and had the kind of discreet, layered security that didn't announce itself. They moved there at 9 in the morning, all four of them plus Garrett in a second vehicle, and Sophie spent the car ride asking Lily detailed questions about high school that Lily answered with the resigned, slightly flattered attention of someone who has not previously been consulted as an authority on anything. Ethan drove. Aurora sat in the passenger seat. At some point, without either of them acknowledging it, her hand was resting on the console between them, and at some further point his was resting beside it, and somewhere in the 40-minute drive to Bellevue those two things became one thing, briefly, before the practical business of arrival required both hands back on the wheel. Neither of them said anything about it. Neither of them needed to. The waiting was the hardest part. It always was. Ethan knew this from experience, from years of sitting in forward operating bases while other pieces of a larger operation moved into place, from the particular discipline of staying ready without burning through readiness on things that weren't happening yet. He moved through the safe house, checking angles and entries, while Sophie and Lily established themselves in front of the television with a level of collaborative efficiency that surprised him, and Aurora sat at the dining room table with her laptop working with the specific focused calm of a person who has made peace with whatever is about to happen and is using the remaining time productively. Cross called at 2:17 in the afternoon. "Warrant signed," she said. Her voice had a quality in it that Ethan hadn't heard before, something that might have been, in a person less controlled, relief. "We're moving on Voss first. Kane's people are aware something is happening. He may try to run, but we have eyes on him." A pause. "Doyle is the complicated one." "How complicated?" "Sitting senator. We have to be precise." Another pause. "We're precise." "Timeline?" "Arrests begin within the hour. You'll know when it's done." He told Aurora when he got off the phone. She was looking at her laptop when he sat down across from her, and she looked up when he said the word warrants, and something moved through her face that was big and complicated and only lasted about 3 seconds before she got control of it again. But he saw it. "An hour," she said. "Maybe more. Cross will call." Aurora nodded and looked back at her laptop and then closed it, set it aside, looked at the table. "I don't know what to do with my hands," she said. "You said that before." "It keeps being true." She looked at him. "Tell me something, anything, something that isn't this." He thought about it. "Sophie asked me last week if dolphins were smarter than people." Aurora looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said smart in different ways." She decided echolocation was cooler than intelligence. Something real and warm opened up in Aurora's expression. "She's not wrong." "She usually isn't." He paused. "She talked to you for a long time last night. About Mackenzie." She needed to finish saying it, Aurora said simply. "Sometimes you just need to finish saying a thing." He looked at her. "Thank you for listening to her." "She's easy to listen to," Aurora said. "She has your directness. The way you both say exactly what you mean without all the—" She waved a hand vaguely. "The noise people put around things." "Claire was like that too," he said. He said it carefully, not because it hurt. It did, the specific dull ache of something that had become familiar. but because he was noting it accurately, the way you note things that are true. Sophie got it from her. Aurora was quiet for a moment. What was she like? Dry, he said. Funny in a way that caught people off guard. She could talk to anyone. The kind of person who made strangers feel like they'd been friends for years. He paused. She would have liked you. The statement landed in the space between them, and Aurora held it carefully, the way she held things that mattered. That means something, she said quietly. Coming from you. I know, he said. That's why I said it. Across the house, Sophie laughed at something on the television. A bright, uncomplicated sound that moved through the rooms of the safe house and changed the air in them, the way children's laughter tends to change the rooms it moves through. Lily said something dry in response that made Sophie laugh harder. The television played on. The call from Cross came at 4:49. Voss is in custody. Kane tried to make the airport. We had him at the gate. Nick. A pause that was almost satisfied. Doyle released a statement 40 minutes ago saying he's cooperating fully with federal investigators. His attorney is already negotiating. Ethan exhaled. It's not fully wrapped, Cross said. There are threads. There will be a process. Things take time in the legal system. But the operational threat to Ms. Kensington is over. The men who were directing and funding the actions against her are in custody or in the process of cooperating. Another pause. You can come home. He put the phone down and sat with it for a moment, the specific silence of a thing being finished, which was different from all the silences that came before it. He went to find Aurora. She was in the kitchen, which he was starting to understand was where she went when things were happening that she needed to be close to food preparation equipment to handle. He stood in the doorway. She looked at his face. Over? She said. Substantively, he said. Voss, Kane, Doyle is cooperating. She turned around and looked at the counter for a moment, hands flat on it, pressing down the way she did. He watched the line of her back, the slight movement in her shoulders that was breath, the stillness of the next few seconds. Then she turned back around. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, which he'd expected. Her eyes were brighter than normal, which he'd also expected, and which she would not be commenting on, and neither would he. We should tell the girls, he said. Yes. She moved past him toward the living room and paused in the doorway and turned back briefly. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you, she said. Just that plainly, without decoration, the way she said everything that mattered. He nodded. They went and told the girls. Sophie received the news with a seriousness that lasted approximately 8 seconds, and then immediately wanted to know if this meant they could go home and have grilled cheese for dinner, and whether the particular kind of grilled cheese in question could have the tomatoes on the side, not inside, which was a boundary she wished to reestablish after several days of disrupted domestic routine. Lily received the news with a quiet that lasted longer, and then she looked at her mother and said, So you're okay? And Aurora said, Yes, we're okay. And Lily nodded once, precisely, and said, Good, in the voice of someone who had been frightened for a long time and was choosing to process that privately, which was her right and which Aurora respected by not pressing it. They ate dinner in the safe house that night, takeout from a Thai place 3 blocks away, that Sophie selected by the rigorous method of looking at the menu and pointing at the thing with the most noodles. And the 4 of them sat around a government-issue dining table and ate pad see ew and spring rolls. And Sophie told a long, detailed story about the dolphin conversation and Mrs. Harrington and cognitive abilities that wound back through several tangents before arriving somewhere. And Lily contributed a story about a Westlake teacher who apparently had no ability to control her classroom, and Aurora laughed at it. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere unrehearsed. And Ethan sat at the end of the table and ate his noodles and didn't say much. But he was present in a way that was different from the way he'd been present in rooms for the past 2 years. The watching from the perimeter presence of someone whose primary function is to stand between things and the people he's protecting. He was just there, at the table. With the noise and the noodles and the stories, it felt like something he'd misplaced a long time ago and hadn't known how to describe the absence of until right now. eating pad see ew in a federal safe house in Bellevue with his daughter gesturing at him with a chopstick to underscore a point about dolphins. He didn't name it, but he held it, carefully, the way you hold things you don't want to drop. Later, after Sophie was asleep on the safe house couch under a blanket that Aurora had found in a hall closet, and Lily had retreated to the room she'd claimed with a book and headphones, Ethan stood on the back porch of the house in the cold November air and looked at the sky, which was clear tonight for the first time in a week, the clouds having moved through to leave behind the particular dark blue of a cold, clear night with stars. He heard the door behind him and didn't turn around. Aurora came to stand beside him. She had a sweater over her earlier clothes and her hands in her pockets, and she looked at the sky too, following whatever he was looking at, or looking at something different. "Richard is going to be charged," she said. "Cross confirmed it an hour ago. Financial conspiracy, obstruction, accessory to the attempts against me. I know. Lily's going to have to—" She stopped. "It's going to be complicated for her." "Yeah. She's tougher than she thinks she is." "She held Sophie's hand in the dark," Ethan said. "She's plenty tough." Aurora was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about what you said. About Claire." He waited. "About her making people feel like they'd been friends for years." Aurora looked at the sky. "Sophie does that. I felt it last night in about 30 seconds. A pause. "She made me feel like I'd known her a long time. Is that strange to say?" "No," he said. "Because it wasn't strange. It was accurate. Sophie did that. Inherited it from her mother, refined it into something her own, this quality of making people feel located and seen, which was rarer than it should be." "I like her," Aurora said, simply. "She likes you too," he said. "She fixed her hair for you." Aurora turned to look at him. "What?" "At midnight when I went to get her. She insisted on fixing her hair before she'd leave the apartment." He paused. "She doesn't fix her hair for people she doesn't care about." Something complicated and warm moved through Aurora's expression. She turned back to the sky. "We're going to have to figure out what this is," she said. Not pressuring anything, just stating the reality of it the way she stated most realities, directly, without pretense. "I know," he said. "I'm not in a hurry," she said. "I just don't want to pretend it isn't a thing." "I'm not going to pretend it isn't a thing," he said. She nodded, and they stood in the cold air and looked at the sky. And somewhere inside the house a board creaked under someone's foot, and then went quiet. And the stars were out. And the thing that had been building for 2 months and had survived everything the last 2 months had thrown at it was still standing, solid and unannounced, in the space between two people on a back porch in November. The grilled cheese happened the next evening. Back in his apartment, tomatoes on the side, Sophie at the kitchen table narrating a detailed plan for what she was going to say to Mackenzie on Monday that involved several logical arguments about the nature of sadness and weirdness that she'd apparently been composing for days. He listened to all of it. He flipped the sandwiches. His phone buzzed. "Aurora. Lily asked me tonight if you were going to be around." He looked at the message. Sophie was still talking, gesturing with her fork now to underscore a point, fully committed. He typed back, "What did you tell her?" 3 dots. Then, "I said yes. Was that okay?" He looked at his daughter, at the kitchen he'd learned to cook in, at the coffee can on the refrigerator with the $63 that was no longer necessary, at the apartment that was small and had a cracked window latch he kept meaning to fix, and a solar system made of styrofoam and glitter, still set up in the corner of the living room because neither of them had found the heart to take it down. "Yes," he typed. That was okay. He put the phone down and put the grilled cheese on the plate and set it in front of Sophie, tomatoes separate in a small bowl on the side, and she looked at it and looked at him and said, with the complete sincerity of someone for whom food prepared correctly is a genuine act of love, perfect. It wasn't. The bread was a little dark on one side, and he'd used the wrong cheese because the grocery run had been rushed and the tomatoes were slightly cold from the fridge. But Sophie ate every bite. The legal machinery, once it started moving, moved with the grinding thoroughness of something that had been wound up for a long time and was finally allowed to run. Harlan Voss was arraigned on federal charges that filled 3 pages of a criminal complaint. conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, accessory to assault, wire fraud, and a supplemental charge related to David Mercer's death that Cross had been building carefully for 11 months, and finally had enough to bring. He entered a not guilty plea through an attorney who looked like he charged more per hour than most people earned in a month, and was remanded without bail on the grounds that a man with his resources and international connections represented a genuine flight risk, which he did. Richard Kane's attorney tried harder. He argued for bail, argued for house arrest, argued that his client was a respected member of the business community with deep roots in the Pacific Northwest. And Cross sat in the courtroom and let the attorney make his arguments and then presented 47 pages of financial documentation to the judge, who set bail at a number that made the attorney blink and Kane's face go a specific shade of gray. He made bail anyway, because men like Richard Kane always had the resources to make bail. But the ankle monitor and the surrendered passport meant he wasn't going anywhere, and his attorney's confident posture in the hallway afterward was the posture of a man who had looked at the discovery materials and understood he was managing a loss, not contesting one. Senator William Doyle resigned from the Armed Services Appropriations Committee on a Thursday morning, releasing a statement through his office that used the phrases, "reflecting on my service, best interests of my constituents, and time with my family," in a configuration that satisfied no one and deceived no one, but technically said nothing that could be used against him pending the cooperation agreement his attorneys had spent 3 days negotiating with the Department of Justice. Cross had told Ethan in one of their last conversations on the burn phone that Doyle was giving them everything: names, timelines, transaction records, the internal communications of the consortium going back 9 years. He was 63 years old and had done the math on what federal prison looked like at 63, and had decided that cooperation was the more interesting option. The consortium, as a functioning entity, stopped existing somewhere in the third week of December. Not dramatically. It didn't announce its end, didn't collapse in any single visible moment. It just stopped being able to do the things it did, because the people who ran it were in custody or under indictment or cooperating, or in 2 cases, had quietly relocated to addresses that their attorneys declined to share and that weren't in jurisdictions with active extradition agreements. The network that had taken 9 years to build and had operated with the patient, invisible confidence of something that had never been seriously challenged, came apart in 41 days. Ethan followed all of it from a distance that was appropriate for a man whose role in it was officially civilian and informally significant and publicly non-existent. Cross had been scrupulous about keeping his name out of the federal filings, not because she was doing him a favor, but because it was accurate. He hadn't been operating in any official capacity, and the things he'd done that night at 4:17 in the morning were defensible as the actions of a private citizen protecting a household under attack, which they were, and nobody was interested in looking harder at them than that. He was grateful for the not looking. He'd spent enough of his life being looked at by people with clearances and objectives. What occupied most of December was not the legal proceedings, which moved on their own trajectory without requiring much from him, but the slower, less dramatic work of things going back to normal. Or rather, things finding a new normal, because the old one had been $47 and a cracked laptop hinge and a napkin full of numbers that never added up, and none of that was coming back, and he wasn't sure he'd want it to. Sophie went back to school on the Monday after Thanksgiving with the composed determination of someone who has decided in advance how a difficult situation is going to go. Ethan had asked her carefully on the Sunday night how she was feeling about seeing Mackenzie. Sophie had considered this with the seriousness she brought to genuine questions. "I thought about what I was going to say," she told him. "I practiced it." "What did you come up with?" "I'm going to say that what she said was mean, and that it hurt my feelings, and that I'd like her not to say things like that again." Sophie delivered this with the flat, factual clarity of someone reading from a well-prepared statement. Mrs. Harrington says using I statements is more effective than accusation. Mrs. Harrington is right. I know, I looked it up too. She paused. Do you think it will work? I think it might. And if it doesn't, at least you said the true thing. Sophie nodded, accepting this. Then, did you ever have to do something like that? Tell someone they hurt your feelings? He thought about it honestly, which Sophie always deserved. Not often, he said. I was better at just leaving the situation than addressing it. That's not very healthy. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked at him steadily. Are you working on it? He held her gaze. 9 years old, asking her father if he was working on his emotional avoidance patterns, in those words, on a Sunday evening. I'm working on it, he said. Good, she said, and went to pack her backpack, satisfied. The Mackenzie situation resolved itself with the imperfect, slightly anticlimactic messiness of real-life conflicts between children, which is to say that Sophie said her prepared statement on Monday morning. Mackenzie cried, the teacher got involved. There was a conversation about kindness that both parties found uncomfortable, and by Wednesday they were not friends but had reached a functional détente that allowed them to coexist in the same classroom without active hostility. Not a perfect outcome, but a real one. And Sophie reported it to Ethan that evening with the measured assessment of someone who had wanted a cleaner resolution and was learning to accept the one that was actually available. She didn't apologize, right? Sophie said. She said, I'm sorry you felt bad instead of, I'm sorry I said that. That's not the same thing. No, Ethan said, it's not. I let it go anyway. Why? Sophie poked at her dinner. Because I didn't want to spend any more time on it, she said. It was taking up too much of my headspace. He looked at his daughter. That's very mature. Mrs. Harrington said the same thing. She looked up. Is mature a compliment, or is it the thing adults say when they can't think of anything else? Both, sometimes. In this case, it's a real compliment. She accepted this and went back to dinner. And Ethan sat across from her and thought about headspace and what you choose to spend it on, and found he had some things to apply that lesson to himself. Aurora's company came through the fall the way ships come through bad weather. Battered, listing slightly, but intact. The media coverage of the arrests had been unavoidable and had created exactly the kind of uncertainty among investors and clients that Aurora had spent months trying to prevent. But the shape of the story, a woman who'd built something real and refused to surrender it to people who wanted to take it apart, turned out to be a more compelling narrative than anyone had predicted, including Aurora herself. The federal contract she'd been about to lose, the one the consortium had spent 18 months manipulating to redirect, was reinstated in early December after the procurement process was officially reviewed and the interference documented. 3 other contracts that had been in limbo came through in the same month. Her investor group, which had shown signs of wavering in November, stabilized when the full scope of what she'd been fighting against became public record, and it became clear she'd been winning. She called Ethan when the reinstatement came through. I need you to know something, she said. Okay. I'm going to keep running the company. She said it with the particular quality of someone who has been through enough to know that certainty is earned rather than assumed, and is stating something they've genuinely decided rather than defaulted into. I went back and forth on it, whether this was a sign that I should do something different, something smaller, something that didn't attract. All of this. A pause. But I built this because I wanted it to exist, and what just happened doesn't change whether it should exist. No, he said, it doesn't. I'm going to run it differently, more carefully, better board oversight, better security culture from the start, not as an afterthought. She paused. And I want you to keep doing what you've been doing, formally, not just informally. I want to build a proper security infrastructure, with you in charge of it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not a desk person, he said. I know, neither am I. A pause. I'm not asking you to sit behind a desk. I'm asking you to help me build something that doesn't need rescuing again. He thought about it. He'd been thinking about it, in the background of everything else for weeks. What came after? What a life looked like that wasn't built around crisis or constructed in secret or constantly braced against the next thing. What it looked like to do work that mattered without the work requiring him to stop being a father in order to do it. What are the hours? He said. She laughed. The real one. The unrehearsed one. Negotiable, she said. Within reason. Grilled cheese on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he said. Non-negotiable. I'll put it in the contract. I mean that, he said. I know you mean it, she said. That's why I'll put it in the contract. He said yes. The contract, when it arrived, did not actually contain a grilled cheese clause, but it contained a schedule provision that would have made the previous version of his life, the $47 version, the napkin full of numbers version, unrecognizable. And he signed it at his kitchen table on a Wednesday evening while Sophie did her homework across from him and periodically offered editorial commentary on his signature, which she found insufficiently dramatic for someone in a security role. "You should sign with more confidence," she said. "Like this." She demonstrated on her notebook with a flourish that involved several unnecessary loops. "I'll take it under advisement," he said. Christmas that year was the first one in 3 years that didn't feel primarily like something to get through. It still had the specific gravity of Christmases that include the absence of someone who used to be there. That didn't go away, he'd learned. It just changed shape. But it had something else in it too. Something that hadn't been present in the previous two. Aurora had invited them for Christmas Eve. She'd mentioned it the way she mentioned most things, without pressure or decoration. "Lily and I are doing dinner at the house. If you and Sophie want to come, come." The simplicity of it was, he'd come to understand, characteristic. She didn't oversell things, she just made them available. Sophie had said yes before he finished relaying the invitation. "Can I bring something?" Sophie asked. "I think they have food covered." "I should bring something. It's polite." She thought about it. "I'll make the thing." "What thing?" "The thing Mom used to make. The cheese thing." He was quiet for a second. "The baked brie?" "Yes." "Do you know how to make it?" He did not know how to make it. He'd watched Claire make it exactly 4 times, which turned out to be enough to reconstruct the general method, but not the specific timing, which resulted in a 40-minute process that produced something that was approximately right, but not exactly right. Sophie tasted it, assessed it with her eyes half closed, and declared it close. "Close good or close bad?" he asked. "Close good," she said. "It needs more honey." "How do you know what it needs?" "You've had it 4 times." "I remember everything I eat," Sophie said with total sincerity. "It's a gift." He added more honey. Sophie tasted it again. "Now it's right," she said. He packaged it for transport and didn't say anything about the fact that his hands had been slightly unsteady while he made it, not because the task was technically difficult, but because it had belonged to someone else first, and using it felt like both honoring something and changing it, which was uncomfortable and necessary simultaneously. That was the thing about grief that nobody warned you about. It wasn't the sharp moments that accumulated cost. It was the ordinary ones. The recipes, the signatures, the habits that outlasted the person who started them, living on in the people who remained, becoming something both theirs and not. He drove them to Aurora's house on Christmas Eve and parked in the driveway he'd walked for security purposes enough times to know every inch of it. And Sophie carried the brie with the careful gravity of someone transporting something important, and the door opened before they reached it. Lily had opened it. She was in a sweater Ethan hadn't seen before, her hair loose, and she looked at Sophie with the particular expression she'd developed toward Sophie over the past month, fond and slightly exasperated, the way older children look at younger ones who have successfully infiltrated their lives before anyone thought to put up a defense. "You brought something," Lily said, looking at the dish. "Baked brie," Sophie said. "With honey. I made it." "You and your dad made it," Ethan said. "I supervised," Sophie said. Lily held the door open. "Come in before it gets cold." The evening was loud in the particular way of 4 people who are not yet entirely comfortable with each other but are getting there, which is a different and more interesting kind of loud than the loud of people who already know each other completely. Lily had opinions about what music played during dinner, and Sophie had counter-opinions, and they negotiated this with the focused intensity of a minor diplomatic summit, while Aurora and Ethan set the table and navigated around each other in the kitchen with the ease of people who had learned each other's physical rhythms over the course of 2 months of shared coffee and shared crises, and the occasional shared silence. Aurora bumped his shoulder, reaching past him for a serving spoon, and neither of them made anything of it, and neither of them had to. The brie went on the table, and Sophie watched Aurora try it with the focused attention of a chef awaiting a verdict. Aurora tasted it, looked up. "This is very good." "My mom used to make it," Sophie said. She said it the way she said most things about Claire, directly, without wincing away from it, with the specific 9-year-old honesty about difficult truths that Ethan found both painful and instructive. "We made her recipe." Aurora looked at her. "Then it's the best possible thing to have on the table tonight," she said, and meant it. And Sophie could tell she meant it, which was what mattered. Lily said, not quite under her breath, "Okay, that was a good answer." And Aurora gave her a look that contained both gratitude and the instruction to not editorialize, and Lily went back to the music negotiation. They ate dinner, and the conversation moved the way good conversations move, sideways through topics, doubling back, splitting into two parallel discussions at opposite ends of the table, arriving somewhere nobody had planned. Sophie told a long story about the dolphin research she'd been doing independently since the initial conversation, which had apparently expanded to include beluga whales and orcas and a documentary she'd watched 3 times. Lily, who had been planning to be above this topic, found herself asking follow-up questions. Aurora and Ethan talked around the edges of work and the coming months and the quieter, logistical shape of what their professional arrangement would look like once the legal proceedings settled. And underneath that, in the spaces between those words, the other conversation that was happening, which they were both aware of, and neither was rushing. Later, after dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the living room couch in the way that children fall asleep at holiday gatherings. Suddenly, completely, without announcement, 1 minute present and the next entirely elsewhere. Lily covered her with the blanket from the hall closet, which was not a thing Lily did performatively, but a thing Lily did because she was alone with Sophie, and a blanket was what the situation required. And she was, under the 15-year-old protective shell, a person who responded to what situations required. Ethan saw it from the doorway and didn't say anything. He filed it where he filed the things that mattered. He and Aurora were on the back porch again. It had become a pattern, this particular porch at the particular threshold of late evening, which neither of them had scheduled and both of them had come to expect. The temperature had dropped, and their breath made small clouds in the cold air, and the sky was clear again the way it had been that night in the safe house, with the same dark blue and the same particular cold weather stars. "I need to tell you something," Aurora said. "Okay." "I talked to a therapist for the first time last week." He turned to look at her. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "It's not a tragedy. I'm not looking at you like that. You're looking at me like you want to ask why it took me this long." "That's not what I was thinking," he said. "I was thinking it took courage to start." She looked at him. "Was it hard for you? When you—" She stopped. "Did you? After Claire?" "No," he said. "I should have. I didn't." He looked at the sky. "I did the thing where I stayed very busy and told myself that functional was the same as okay." "Is that different from okay?" "Yeah," he said. "It is." He paused. "What made you go?" "Lily asked me to," Aurora said. There was something in her voice when she said it, something that had been worked through partially but not entirely. She said that she'd watched me carry everything alone for years and that it scared her, that she didn't want me to teach her that that was what strength looked like. A pause. "She's 15, and she said that." "She's your daughter." "She's smarter than me," Aurora said, almost to herself. "Which I think is supposed to happen, but it still surprises me." He thought about Sophie's question on the Sunday evening, "Are you working on it?" And the way it had landed, accurate and unashamed and completely matter-of-fact, the way children's most important questions tended to be. "They're both smarter than us," he said. "Terrifying," Aurora agreed, but her voice had something warm in it. They stood in the cold air and he thought about the things that the past 3 months had broken open in him that he hadn't fully examined yet. The parts of himself that had been on operational hold since Claire died, since he'd gotten out, since he'd built the careful, functional, just getting through it life that had worked well enough, until $47 and a rainy morning and a woman who noticed things. He thought about functional and okay, and the difference between the two. And he thought about Sophie asking him if he was working on it with her matter-of-fact expectation that the answer would be yes. And he thought about what it meant to decide, actually decide, to stop bracing against the next thing and start building something for after it. "I have something to ask you," he said. Aurora turned to look at him. "When this is fully settled, the proceedings, the last of the legal things, I want to take Sophie somewhere. A week somewhere. Nothing specific. Just somewhere we haven't been where nothing is happening. He paused. I want to ask if Lily could come. Aurora went very still in the way she went still when something landed on her that she hadn't anticipated. And you, he said, if you want. She looked at him for a long moment. The porch light was behind her and the stars were above, and she was just a person standing in the cold in her own backyard, slightly bundled, with the specific look of someone processing something they'd been hoping for without quite admitting they'd been hoping for it. Yes, she said, to Lily, or to all of it. She held his gaze. Yes. Something eased in him that had been tightly held for a long time, some last structural tension releasing, and he was aware of it as a physical thing, a loosening across his shoulders and chest that felt like something he'd been carrying being set down somewhere rather than lost. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. The trip happened in February, which was not an obvious time to go anywhere but turned out to be exactly right. They drove to the Oregon coast, 3 days, a house rental that Sophie had found online and lobbied for with a 40-slide argument that was mostly photographs of a beach house with a fire pit and proximity to a marine research center that had public visiting hours, these two things being, in Sophie's assessment, the non-negotiable requirements. The drive down was 6 hours with 2 stops. And by the second hour, Sophie and Lily had established a car-based ecosystem that involved shared headphones, an argument about a podcast that was resolved in Lily's favor, and a collaborative ranking of every type of cheese they could name that Sophie had initiated, and Lily had been unable to resist engaging with, which Ethan caught Aurora watching in the rearview mirror with the expression of someone watching something they hadn't expected and had no defense against. They're going to be fine, he said quietly, just for her. Aurora looked at him. I know, she said, not dismissively, with the quality of someone who has been working toward believing something and has finally arrived. The house was exactly what Sophie's photographs had promised, a blue-painted structure set back from the beach with a fire pit in the yard and a view of the water from every room that faced west, which was most of them. It was cold and the wind came off the ocean with the specific personality of Oregon coast wind, which doesn't negotiate, and there was sand and everything within 40 minutes of arrival, and the fire pit took 3 attempts to light because the wood was damp, and Sophie burned her marshmallow and cried briefly and then ate it anyway and pronounced it better, actually, and none of it was smooth and all of it was real. Lily found the Marine Research Center on day 2 and disappeared into it for 2 hours with Sophie, who came back describing a sea lion rehabilitation program with the intensity of someone who has found a calling and is announcing it. Lily came back more quietly, but with the slightly dazed look of someone who has had a better time than she'd allocated for. She wants to work with marine animals, Lily told Aurora and Ethan that evening around the fire pit, with the tone of reporting a discovery rather than complaining about it. I do, Sophie confirmed, still in her jacket and sandy from the beach, eating her second hot dog. Specifically, marine mammals, pinnipeds mostly, but also cetaceans. She knows the words, Lily said, in the specific voice of someone who has been educated by a 9-year-old against her will. She always knows the words, Ethan said. Sophie looked at the fire. Do you think I could do that? When I'm older? I think you could do most things, Ethan said. That's a dad answer. It's also true. Sophie looked at him sidelong with the skeptical accuracy he'd never fully gotten used to, and then apparently decided to accept it and went back to her hot dog. Aurora was sitting across the fire pit, and Ethan was watching the flames, and for a while none of them said much, just the 4 of them around a fire on an Oregon beach in February with the sound of the ocean a constant under everything, and the stars beginning to come out above them. And it was cold, and the wood was still slightly damp, and the smoke kept shifting into someone's face, and nobody had found a comfortable chair arrangement, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine, the real kind, not the carefully maintained functional kind, and the difference was something he felt in his whole body, the way you feel weather. He thought about the cafe, the napkin, the $47. He thought about the whiteboard in a conference room covered in names and lines that traced the shape of something designed to destroy a woman who'd built something real. He thought about 4:17 in the morning and his daughter on a couch in a safe house, and minestrone in a bowl on a counter, and a woman who said, "I'm glad you're here," as though it were a plain fact and not something that required a speech. He thought about Claire and the way grief had changed over 3 years from a presence that occupied the center of everything to something that lived in the peripheral space of certain moments. The baked brie, the signature, the borrowed recipe. Quiet and real, and no longer requiring him to organize his entire existence around managing it. That was something nobody had told him would happen, and something he was grateful for. Not the absence of it, the accommodation of it, the way a life could grow around a loss until the loss was part of the life rather than the interruption of it. Sophie said out of nowhere in the way she said most things that mattered, "Do you think Mom would have liked this?" He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. The wind moved through the beach grass. "Yes," he said. "She loved the coast. She always wanted to take you here." Sophie received this with the gravity it deserved. "Then I'm glad we came." "Me too, Bug." "Even though the wood is wet and the smoke keeps being in my face?" "Even though," Sophie nodded, satisfied, and ate the rest of her hot dog. Aurora was watching him from across the fire, and when he looked up, she didn't look away, just held his gaze for a moment with the directness that was so particularly hers. And there was something in it that wasn't the assessment she'd been running since the morning she'd watched him walk away in the rain. Something that had come after the assessment, after everything the assessment had turned up, a thing that was more specific and more settled than assessment. He looked back at her and let her see what was on his face too, which was similar. Lily, who was 15 and possessed of the specific peripheral social awareness of a teenager who pays attention to everything and pretends not to, said something to Sophie about the sea lion they'd seen, and Sophie's attention pivoted completely toward that, and the moment resolved itself back into the ordinary, which was where all the real things happened anyway. They drove back on a Sunday, and the traffic around Tacoma was bad in the way Sunday traffic always is, and Sophie fell asleep in the back seat for the last 2 hours, and Lily put headphones on and read, and Ethan drove while the city came back into view, the familiar wet gray shape of Seattle rising out of the rain, and Aurora sat in the passenger seat beside him. She'd fallen half asleep too, or was somewhere near the edge of sleep, and her head had tipped slightly sideways toward the window, and she'd made no effort to correct it. He drove and watched the road and didn't say anything. She said quietly, not quite all the way awake, "Thank you for this." "You paid for half the rental." "Not for that," she said. She didn't open her eyes. "For all of it." He drove. "You're welcome," he said. Just that. The months after came with the ordinary difficulty of real things. The federal proceedings moved slowly, as federal proceedings do, and Ethan sat in a deposition room twice to give statements that were precise and factual, and, per his agreement with Cross, as limited in specific operational detail as the prosecutors could accept. Voss's legal team made motions. Kane's legal team made motions. The motions were argued and decided, and new motions were filed in the specific rhythm of a process that doesn't care about anyone's urgency. Cross called Ethan every 2 weeks or so to update him, and the updates were consistently in the direction of the case rather than against it, which was all he could reasonably ask. Lily started seeing a therapist in March, which she'd decided herself, which Aurora told Ethan about on the phone one evening with the particular quality of voice that parents use when something is both painful and correct. The gratitude and the helplessness mixed together. Lily was processing her father, the trial, the years before the trial, that she'd spent watching a parent be something she hadn't expected. And she was doing it with the methodical courage of someone who had decided to be the version of herself she wanted to be rather than the one that circumstances had been building by default. She didn't talk about it much, but when she did, she was honest. And honesty in a 15-year-old with that much reason to be defended was, in Ethan's observation, its own kind of strength. Sophie turned 10 in April, which she greeted as a milestone of some significance. "I'm in double digits now," she told Ethan on her birthday morning with the gravity of a civic announcement. "You've been in double digits for about 4 minutes. Still counts." She looked up at him from the kitchen table, where she was eating the birthday pancakes he'd made, which came out uneven as they always did because he'd never fully learned to make them round. "Dad." "Yeah. Are you happy?" He looked at her across the uneven birthday pancakes. Yes, he said. She studied him with the sonar, running the full calibration. He let her run it. He wasn't worried about the result because he'd given her the accurate answer. Okay, she said, and ate a pancake. Good. They had her birthday dinner that evening with Aurora and Lily. Sophie's request, specific and unpressured, which was the best kind of request. They ate at a restaurant Sophie had chosen, which specialized in things that came from the sea, and had a tank in the lobby that Sophie stood at for 11 minutes before anyone could get her to the table, explaining to Lily the different species with an accuracy that made the hostess, who was a marine biology student, stop and listen. Lily listened too. Not because she was being polite, Ethan could tell the difference by now, but because Sophie was genuinely interesting when she got going, and Lily had stopped pretending she didn't find her interesting about 2 months ago. After dinner, walking out, Sophie took Lily's hand in the unselfconscious way she sometimes did, and Lily didn't pull away. Ethan and Aurora walked behind them in the light from the restaurant windows, and the city made its city sounds around them, and it was cold in the specific way of Seattle spring evenings, and neither he nor Aurora was in a hurry to get to the cars. I've been thinking, Aurora said. About what? About what this is. She said it with the directness that he'd stopped bracing for because it was never aimed at anything other than the truth. What we're doing. What it's becoming. He looked at the girls ahead of them, Sophie animating something with her free hand while Lily listened with the fond, exasperated patience she'd developed for Sophie's enthusiasm. Yeah, he said. Me too. And? He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wanted it to be the right one. Not the careful one, not the functional one, but the actually accurate one. I think it's something I wasn't planning, he said, that turned out to be something I needed more than most of the things I was planning. He paused. I think it's real. Aurora walked beside him for a few steps. It's real, she confirmed, the way she confirmed things. Not as a question, just as a statement of a thing she'd already established for herself and was now making mutual. It's also complicated, he said. Yes. We have 2 kids between us and a federal case in progress, and you run a billion-dollar company, and I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not protecting someone. I know all of that, she said. I just want to say it plainly. I know you do. She glanced at him. That's one of the things. What things? The things. She left it at that, which was enough. Sophie looked back and saw them walking and did the mental calculation that 9, 10-year-olds do when they observe adults together, and the conclusion she reached was visible briefly in her expression before she turned back to Lily and said something that made Lily snort and cover it up by looking at her phone. Ethan didn't ask what she'd said. He had a feeling he'd find out eventually, probably at a moment when it was most effective, delivered with the accuracy Sophie brought to everything. The last of the principal legal proceedings resolved in June. Voss accepted a plea, 19 years, minimum security, cooperation required. Kane went to trial, was convicted on 6 of 8 counts, and was sentenced on a Tuesday afternoon that Aurora attended and Ethan did not, because Aurora needed to be there and Ethan needed to be the person who was somewhere else, ready for when it was done. She called him from the courthouse steps. 11 years, she said. He heard the texture of her voice, the complex, not quite relief of a thing being finished that was never going to be clean. Are you okay? He said. A pause. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me tonight. I'll ask you tonight, he said. She came over that evening. Sophie was at a friend's house, an actual friend, the marine biology documentary having opened a social door with a classmate named Priya, whose parents had a fish tank, and Lily was with a school friend of her own, and the apartment was quiet in the way it was almost never quiet. They sat on the couch with takeout. Neither of them was eating, and she told him how it had felt, being in the courtroom. She didn't perform any of it. She said the true things, that it felt smaller than she'd thought, that watching Richard in the defendant's chair she'd felt something she hadn't been prepared for, which was pity, uncomplicated by anything else. The pity of looking at a person who had built their entire life around acquiring things and had ended up with none of the things that mattered. that she'd cried in the bathroom afterward, which she was telling him because it had happened and she wasn't going to pretend it hadn't. "I cried," she said, "and then I washed my face and went back out." "That sounds about right," he said. "It's done," she said. "The whole thing. It's done." He looked at her on his couch in his apartment, and she looked at him, and the done of it settled around them. Not triumphantly, not dramatically, just as a fact. The thing that had started in a cafe in the rain, that had moved through whiteboards and parking garages and safe houses and a back porch in the dark, had arrived here, at a couch and takeout on a Tuesday in June, and that was where it ended. Not where everything ended, just where that part did. He reached across the couch, and she took his hand, and he didn't say anything, and neither did she. And they sat together in the quiet of the apartment while the city made its sounds outside. And the story of the thing that had been trying to destroy her was finished, and what was starting was the other kind of story. The kind without an antagonist, the slower and more demanding kind, the kind that required something different from him than combat readiness and tactical clarity. The kind that just required him to show up. He was learning that. He was working on it. Sophie had asked him to, and he'd said yes, and he kept that promise the same way he kept the others. Not perfectly, not without the occasional relapse into the keeping very busy and calling it okay, but consciously, with the understanding that choosing to build something was different from and harder than choosing to protect something, and that both were necessary, and that he was, for the first time in a long time, capable of both. He showed up. That was the thing, in the end. Not the combat skills or the tactical thinking or the decade of training that had let him take 6 men and hold a house for 16 minutes in the dark. Those things were part of him and always would be. The way anything that shapes you at a young enough age becomes permanent. But they were tools, not an identity. And the man who had sat in a cafe with $47 calculating how to pay rent had confused the two for a long time. He showed up for Sophie on her birthday mornings with uneven pancakes. He showed up for the meetings at Kensington Defense Technologies and built the security infrastructure one layer at a time, quietly and without drama. He showed up for the conversations that were hard, the ones where Aurora said something that required a real response rather than a deflection, the ones where Sophie said, "Are you working on it?" with her direct, patient eyes. He showed up. And eventually, not quickly, not without difficulty, not in a straight line, but eventually, showing up was enough to build something on. Sophie told him once, in the fall, sitting on the floor of the living room surrounded by a new project. She'd graduated from the solar system to an elaborate diorama of a kelp forest ecosystem, which involved wire and paint and an amount of research that had occupied 3 weekends, that she thought their life was pretty good now. He looked at her from the couch, where he was reading, or pretending to read. "Yeah?" he said. "Yeah." She didn't look up from the wire she was shaping. "It's not perfect, but it's pretty good." What would make it perfect? She considered this seriously, the way she considered everything seriously. "Nothing," she said finally. "Perfect isn't real. Pretty good is real." She looked up at him. "You said that once." He didn't remember saying it. It sounded like something he might say. "I was right." "You're right sometimes," she allowed. "More than sometimes." "More than sometimes," she conceded. "Don't push it." He went back to his book. The kelp forest took shape around her, wire by wire, and outside the apartment the city went on doing what cities do. And upstairs his phone was probably buzzing with something from Aurora about something at the office. And down the street, Sophie's friend Priya was probably waiting to hear about the next marine mammal documentary, and Lily was probably at home reading 3 books simultaneously in the way she did. And Garrett was probably somewhere doing whatever people like Garrett did on evenings off. And Cross had probably closed another case and was already building another one. And all of it was happening simultaneously, the ordinary ongoing complexity of lives that are actually being lived. Ethan Walker sat on his couch and read his book. He wasn't nobody. He'd never really been nobody. He'd just been a man who needed to stop moving long enough to find out who he was when the fighting was finished. Turns out that man was a father, a partner. Someone who ate soup standing up and learned to braid hair and kept his promises and showed up consistently for the things that deserved showing up for. The kelp forest grew. He turned the page.